One day, God created a new world, and it was an eccentric world, created only to relieve boredom. God called this world the Abyss, and then he slowly began to fill this world with his creations. Huge numbers of people, monsters, and everything they needed to live fell from the sky to the ground. Fighting and war became desperate but inevitable means of survival. Everyone in the world had to survive at all costs. One had to constantly fight alongside others against monsters, as well as against oneself in endless wars. Some heroes would die and new ones would take their place, who would also die after a while. It was a very troubled and dark time when everyone was fighting each other, but they did it for a reason. When you fight, kill, survive, God rewards you with whatever you want. He gives you a huge amount of gold and other jewels. And it seems that God was okay with it, he liked it, or maybe he had nothing else more interesting than this activity. One generation of warriors followed another. In these endless battles there were huge creatures, terrible monsters, great dragons that killed people again and again. And there seemed to be no escape. Another hero lay on the ground, awaiting his imminent death. The giant dragon was preparing to launch a large magical ball of white energy at him, destroying everyone around him along with the hero. In the last seconds of his life, the young man thought that his team would have definitely handled this monster. However, we are transported through time to the future. Unfortunately, a member of the Death Squad explains that the last squad has been almost completely wiped out. There are only 4 warriors left. That's all that's left of humanity. This girl was a Valkyrie Lord, one of the 4 members of the last Death Squad. Also a young man with glasses and a huge wand. He was a mage, the second of 4 members of the squad. Next is the 3rd member of the team, probably one of the strongest warriors. And last but not least, the 4th member of the group, our protagonist. He sat tiredly on the cold stone and rested, realizing that they were the only ones who could save humanity. And all they could rely on was a space-time crystal to help them travel through time, back to the past. It was a great orb of mystical power, the last hope of mankind, destroyed within 50 years of entering this world. The team members began to argue about who should go back in time and save everyone. Only one person could do it. The young warrior with the sword, smiling maliciously, hinted to the rest of the team that he was the one who could save everyone. But his joy did not seem to be shared by the mage, who doubted his candidacy. At this point, the girl intervened in their conversation, advising everyone to keep their cool in order to avoid unnecessary conflict. She reminded the whole group of their main task. Since most of the Valkyries died in the battle with the Golden Dragons, it was only a matter of time before another one appeared. She took the lead and declared to our hero that he was the only one who could go back in time. Her words elicited no response from the young man, who was too tired. He looked at his bloody hands and realized that he had fought too long. Every day, all these long years, he had killed one monster after another, again and again. And in the end, he could have easily died in those battles, but he survived. The girl came quite close to him to support him in this difficult moment of his reflection. She knelt down in front of him and, looking into his eyes, told him in a friendly way that he was the destiny of humanity and that everything was in his hands now. No matter what happens, he must not give up. Perhaps her words had an effect on the protagonist, because the rest of the team looked in his direction in silence. The mage agreed with her decision. She seemed to have made the right choice. He may not have had as much experience as the other warriors, but in this situation, only he could go back in time. The young warrior noted that he, too, recognized the merits and abilities of our hero. But if he suddenly decides to back out, he's always ready to go in his place. But it seems that he just wanted to go back in time to get all the things he missed in his time. But our hero was not interested in anything material. He was thinking about something else. After that, he stood up and silently walked towards the magic orb, while everyone else followed him with a glance. This incredible magic device truly had immense power. But in the next second, there was a sound behind our heroes' backs, and everyone realized that the dragon was already here. They had to hurry, because the next second, a huge-sized dragon came through a crack in the ceiling and crashed to the ground. It was a huge beast with sharp claws and fiery tongues of flame in its mouth. In the next second, The mage shouted loudly that there was no need to be distracted and that they would try to stop it, and then he began to recite his spells. Magical streams of energy filled the room around them. He needed a little more time to finish his spells, so he asked the rest of the team to help him. His request did not go unheeded, and the other heroes easily stopped the huge blocks that were flying down from the ceiling with their hands. The girl was the first to rush to the attack, commanding her friend to join her. Unfortunately, this dragon was no longer alone. There were many more. In the next second, she smashed her wand against the stone floor with tremendous force. She did this to help her friend, who had to attack the dragon. He gladly went out to fight them, and with all his might, he swung his huge sword and struck a mighty blow. His swing was so powerful that the entire ground beneath his feet shook, and dragon-bearing rocks flew in all directions. Suddenly, he realized that he was in danger, and in the next second, the golden dragon's huge paw fell on him. He barely had enough strength to fend off the attack. It seems our hero was ready to help his friend, but he was stopped by the mage. Since our hero's main weapon was broken, he didn't need to be distracted from the main task at hand. The girl shouted loudly that the mage was right. Our hero didn't need to be distracted. As they parted, she shouted at him not to turn away from people, even if they seemed annoying. She turned in his direction and told him in a lower voice to obey her, at least this time. The girl's eyes began to fill with tears. With his usual grin, our hero replied briefly that he would try. Even in such a difficult situation, he doesn't change his habits, the girl remarked, smiling as well. All eyes were now on the mage and his skills. He had to activate his spells. He looked in the direction of our hero and declared with a stern voice that he had to listen to him. His last words were about the people he would meet. There was no point in killing aimlessly, but he shouldn't feel sorry for the parasites that would plague humanity during the Great War. He should only save those who deserve to live. He also had to keep an eye out for the Berserk King. That bastard had to be killed at all costs. Our hero seemed to understand everything and silently looked at the wizard who was ready to send him back in time. The next second, the wizard shouted loudly for our hero to get ready. The magical sphere spun with incredible speed, and the spatial time portal activated. Huge bolts of lightning and energy did not frighten our hero, who stood firmly on his feet and looked in the direction of the magical ball. In the next second, the mage clapped his hands loudly, ending the spell that sent our hero back in the past. It was just in time, as more golden dragons flew in to take out the rest of the team. In the next second, a powerful flash of light blinded everyone around him. For our hero, the sounds changed dramatically, and he began to hear human speech in a large, densely populated city. He looked down at his healed hands, looked around and realized that the magic had worked. Now he had to do his best not to disappoint his friends. People didn't know where they were. It was another city, foreign to them. Many were gripped by panic and fear of the new place. A young mother screamed to find her missing child, while a man nearby wanted to get back in, crying, lonely children without parents and people blaming each other for what had happened. And in the midst of all this, only our protagonist maintained a cold-blooded calm. Of course, people are pretty excited. They just found themselves in another world. Now it's time to get to know our hero a little better. The year he was born was a special one. It started with 100 people, but the number grew exponentially. There were so many missing people that the situation got out of control. And at the time when our hero was 20 years old, and he was walking down the street like all ordinary people, reading his cell phone, unbelievable things happened. Right above his head, the sky split open and a huge crack appeared, from which something resembling a large eye emerged. And our hero is also missing due to the effects of some unknown force. And he went to another world. It was a world that absorbed other dimensions and was the center of the effects of the abyss. The first ones to arrive here immediately learned skills and were hyperactive. They became incredibly powerful warriors. But terrifying monsters made the place a nightmare. They attacked humans again and again. It was a world of cruelty and lawlessness. Those who are swallowed by the abyss are sent to another world. When everyone from the swallowed world is here, the door to the abyss will open and the Great War will begin. Our hero had only 5 years to become strong. He looked carefully at his hands, which weren't as strong as they used to be. All his learned skills, all his strength were gone. But he understood what he had to do and what would happen. And in the next second, according to our hero, something interesting would come out of that huge crack in the sky. Panic and terror gripped the people once again, and everyone shouted that the sky was falling on them. However, a strange creature appeared from the crack and began to circle above the people. It was a small flying monster with tiny wings and golden horns on its head. This creature didn't have a frightening appearance, so the people looked in its direction with interest. After a while, this strange creature smiled and introduced itself to the crowd, saying that it was a fairy, a helper. And this being is here to give a special instruction to all present. The little monster began to laugh and smile, and asked everyone to listen to him because he had something very important to tell them. And only our hero, who stood there in silence, realized what was about to happen. He knew that it was a false briefing, and that everything this little monster was saying was to encourage people to fight and kill each other. Nevertheless, the little monster continued his speech, turning to the crowd and greeting everyone, saying that they had entered another world. From now on, everyone present would be given an amazing opportunity, and astounding abilities would be revealed to them. One man in the crowd didn't like what he saw, and he yelled at the little creature, asking where they had gone. It seems that he was very bitter and wanted to go home. In the next second, the little flying monster's mood and look changed drastically. This did not go unnoticed by the man, who realized that the little monster was probably up to something. Nevertheless, the creature continued with its magical lesson. This little fearsome creature convinced everyone present that they would be granted infinite freedom. Also, all the laws, orders, morals, and ethics of this world no longer applied, because this other world was free of all rules. Hadn't they dreamed of such a thing? But that wasn't all, so the monster went on. All the physical limitations that dragged people down would disappear, and depending on everyone's occupation, they would have an endless opportunity to grow in strength. Like the main characters of the movie, they will endlessly develop all their skills, improving themselves, becoming more powerful and stronger. The little creature continued his speech, for this is a chance for people to become what they dreamed of being. Isn't that beautiful? And in the next second, with a snap of his fingers, he wanted to show everyone what it took to do it. Suddenly, the man who had been talking to the monster began to scream horribly, and a moment later his body was torn apart and he fell dead to the ground, to the horror and fear of everyone present. The little monster said that he apologized for everything that had happened, because he didn't like loud talkers. The crowd was very frightened and began to run away from the place. This behavior of the people displeased the little monster, who in the next second turned into a terrifying, scary devil. In a demonic voice, he shouted loudly that he hated the noise and asked everyone to calm down. With another snap of his fingers, he had destroyed all those who made noise. But there were also those who stood frozen in place in fear, and now they would have to do their best to evolve. They survived. The little monster smiled again, glad that a sepulchral silence had fallen. Now he was ready to show the people the special rune. It could be obtained by killing living creatures. He explained that there were 8 other types. They looked similar. Their appearance was random. The rune he showed to everyone around him was colorless, but if people worked hard and grew, they could get better runes that had color. The small creature explained that this rune was capable of increasing strength. Turning to the crowd, the monster asked who wanted to take it. And out of all those present, only one brave man raised his hand, and that was our hero. Of course, he was familiar with these runes, but he hadn't used them in a while, so he was interested in getting one. The small creature appreciated the man's enthusiasm and began to circle around him. After that, all our hero had to do was hold out his hand to receive the rune. The little devil then happily announced that our hero's power limit had been raised. But that's not all. The rune can do even more. But as soon as he finished his speech, he noticed that our hero had no reaction and was completely calm. Flying away from our hero, this creature explained that runes have different effects depending on their type. They are full of abilities that cannot be explained by human science. Again in his demonic voice, he announced to everyone around him that he wanted to show them something else. Maybe there's someone who wants to do it. His words caused people to tremble and be afraid. However, The creature decided not to continue and asked the people to remember only one thing. No matter what ability or trait the rune improves, it won't be something bad. In order to become stronger, people must collect as many runes as possible. They had to do it just to survive. As soon as the little monster finished his speech, people rushed forward, pushing each other to get the coveted rune. Everyone wanted to be the first and would not give way to the others. They reached out to grab the colorless crystalline substance. Suddenly, the flying creature said that judging by the reaction of the man who had received the rune, it didn't seem as if humans needed any instructions. So, to the disappointment of everyone present, he took all the runes back with him. But that wasn't all. If you touch your right ear, you can see how many runes a person has. The average human has 10. That's all you need to know. After his words, everyone began to examine the magic screen that appeared in front of everyone's eyes, showing the current statistics. Our hero looked at the screen carefully and realized that his power had increased by 1 point. If he collects more runes after the hunt, his mana and magic stats may also increase. Again with a demonic voice, the little monster explained that runes could be obtained anywhere, just by killing a living creature. No matter who their prey would be, they would have to fight and kill. Of course, the starting conditions might be a bit unfair, just like where they lived before. With a laugh, this little devil said that he would give people something that would make them happy at this very moment. Now they had to forget the past and enjoy their new life. In the next second, each of them had a huge sharp knife in their hands. Once this creature leaves the humans, their training will begin. So he advises everyone to do their best. Before they realized what was about to happen, the next second, terrifying goblins appeared in countless numbers, preparing to attack the humans. For a while, numb with horror, the people stood with knives in their hands, not knowing what to do next. Was this really the training this flying monster was talking about? But they didn't seem to have time to think about it, because with a huge noise, something was moving right towards them. With a huge rumbling sound, this incredible number of goblins ran towards the humans, and each of these goblins held a large, sharp sword in his hand, ready to destroy anyone who stood in his way. The goblins paused for a moment to assess the situation and the number of humans they would be fighting. Of course, the rest of the crowd watched in horror, not knowing what to do next. But in that sepulchral silence, there was one who suggested that everyone calm down, don't escalate the situation, and back away slowly. And only our hero stood firmly on his feet and looked at the people who were trying to leave the place. But they didn't seem to get anywhere because they ran into an invisible wall that was impossible to get through. Now they realized that they were trapped in this place, and terror gripped everyone around them. They started pounding their fists on that invisible wall to get through and let them escape. However, this energy wall was so high and large that it would not allow anyone to pass through. Not only that, but this great wall was gradually closing in on them, forming a ring around the goblins. The terrified humans didn't know what to do. Behind them were very scary creatures, goblins that were ready to kill anyone, but they couldn't run away either. Of course, there were some brave people who were ready to fight and didn't want to die for nothing. But in the next second, someone managed to escape and pass through the magic wall. The witnesses of this incredible event could not understand how such a thing could have happened to the young man. He shouted to them from the other side of the wall that he had just passed through someplace and didn't understand why it had happened. Meanwhile, a countdown counter appeared on the wall. It seemed that there were still 49ers left that could have gotten through the wall. The number decreased again by 1 unit to 48. The people were horrified again. Could only 50 people really go out and save their lives? And in the next second, each of them, forming a crush, tried to pass through the narrow opening in the magic wall to escape. Observing this commotion and the people's screams, our hero stepped aside. According to our protagonist, all these people were insignificant. There were 100 of them. They could have gathered and fought, but they chose to run away. Sure, they might have suffered some injuries, but there would have been far fewer deaths. The last time our hero was here, about 40 people died at the hands of the goblins. Of those who couldn't get through the wall, only 10 survived. But this time will be different. First, our hero had to clear this area and then move on to the next one. He made this decision just in time, because a crowd of goblins started running towards the humans. These monsters began killing one person after another who did not return the favor. Many of the humans had no way to escape and fell to the ground, already dead. In the next instant, one of the goblins attacked our hero, but he was immediately destroyed with great ease. This example was very instructive to the entire crowd, but the goblins also stood by and watched their friend die. Our hero rose to his feet and was ready to fight again. The crowd couldn't believe their eyes. However, our hero noticed that his body had become the same as it was decades ago, which made him feel uncomfortable. Nevertheless, he was lucky, and after defeating the goblin, he was able to obtain 2 colorless stones. He immediately decided to check how much his stats had improved. His agility increased by 1/10, but agility doesn't just increase speed. Time itself is perceived differently. There is also a 1/10 increase in reaction speed. So you can do all the same things, just a little faster. But before he could think about it, in the next second, one of the goblins threw a knife in his direction. Our hero easily dodged the blow and in the next instant sent the weapon back, right into the head of that horrible monster. Now there was another goblin on the ground, and that didn't bode well, because the others were very angry. Seeing the blood of their friend, they immediately rushed to attack our hero. Their behavior did not confuse our hunter in the least. As expected, they went into a frenzy at the sight of blood. In the next instant, with quick and precise slashes of his knife, he began to kill one goblin after another. They didn't manage to score a single hit and immediately fell to the ground dead. Our hero continued to kill each of these goblins with ease, and more magic stones began to appear after their destruction. Our warrior immediately grabbed this rune. Some of the men in the crowd wanted to follow his example, since he couldn't fight alone. Realizing that they had no other choice, the people rushed down on the terrifying mass of monsters with a scream, and a bloody battle began. Of course, there was no need for our hero to be in such a hurry from the beginning. However, there was no time to be distracted now, so he had to get the maximum number of runes, and he continued to destroy one goblin after another. Even if you count only this place, a lot of people were kidnapped, and if you count the missing people from all over the world, the number is incalculable. Those who come here for the first time are protected in the training area for a while. It was a special place that protected them for the first 3 months. However, once the months in the training zone are up, people will be thrown into battle with those who have been here for 2 or even 3 years. So, without wasting any time, the hero continued to kill those goblins, taking stone after stone. For him, as for everyone here, it was a chance to be a little bit stronger. Well, it seems that the mage made the right choice in sending him here. Standing firmly on his feet and holding the rune in his hand, our hero surveyed the vast number of goblins lying dead on the ground. Much to the surprise of everyone present, they couldn't believe that he was able to kill so many monsters on his own. But it was true. And now, looking ahead, our hero realized what he had to do. As he wiped the blood from his face, he understood that the battle wasn't over yet. After a while, the little devil reappeared and noted that the humans had done well, but there were still quite a few left. They must have done their best, but many people did not share the monster's enthusiasm and looked at him with disdain. The flying creature then said that now that they knew how to survive, he would remove the wall. In parting, the little monster told them to keep it up. He had other things to do in other zones. Then he disappeared from the same crack in the sky where he had appeared earlier. Many people in the crowd saw him off with insults, calling this monster bad names. Our hero decided to check his stats. Not too bad compared to the last time. His numbers are up. And even though it was only crumbs, it was pretty good for the first training. He was also able to find a new weapon that looked quite useful. It was a special sharp blade. He closed his eyes for a while, wondering what to do next. He had to find a way to get stronger in the shortest possible time. He began to remember his friends and what they would have done in his place. A wave of memories washed over our hero. He remembered a guy who told him a very interesting story. One day they were having a drink with this young man, and he asked our hero if he knew about a hidden dungeon. It was a special hidden dungeon in the training area, and it was of increased complexity. Again, clinking their large mugs with a hot drink, the young man informed our hero that he was unfortunately unable to complete this dungeon, and to be honest, no one could. However, Our hero noticed that the young man had only reached the middle of the place. Nevertheless, he became very strong. These words sounded like a compliment to the young man. Otherwise, he wouldn't be here. Already a little drunk, he loosened his tongue and told our hero that if he had been in the past, he would have definitely cleaned up this dungeon. In that case, he'd probably be able to defeat our hero. One thing was for sure, the harder the dungeon and the less likely it seemed to be won, the bigger the reward. After recalling this story, our hero clearly realized that his next destination had been chosen. However, there were a few things he needed to do before he could go there. The first level of learning. The first stage is when hundreds of people come together and have to work together. Everyone works in a certain area during the week. Then the zone changes and so on for 3 months. Then, when the second stage of training is completed, the safe zone will cease to exist and everyone will have the opportunity to contact those who came earlier. There are 2 parts hidden in the first stage of the tutorial, and no one has ever reached the end. To reach the end of the hidden dungeon, our hero will have to go through all stages. It was the only way to quickly become stronger. But first, he had to find the hidden part. As he scanned the area, he imagined that it had to be here somewhere, close by. The next thing he knew, someone was shouting behind him, and he turned around to see a couple talking loudly. A young man held the girl's hand and offered to take her with the rest of the group, but she didn't want to and said she would go on alone. This was nothing new for our hero here. Conflict started everywhere. The young man held the girl's hand tightly, but considering her appearance, he wanted more than just her help. Still holding her hand, he tried to convince her that in order to survive, they had to stick together. Our hero was sorely tempted to help this girl, but he had no time for such trifles. He had 1 week to find the hidden piece, or it would disappear. But the next second, someone called his name again, and he turned to look at the guy with the headphones around his neck. Our hero pretended not to know the young man. Of course, this guy was pretty surprised, as were the others behind his back. Our hero was immediately approached by another young man in a light-colored bike and tall, who told him he was probably crazy because they were all together before arriving here. Our hero still didn't seem to understand how they could have known his name, but he immediately remembered that he had once gone to college with these guys. Once upon a time, they had fought together, but after a while, all those guys died and he forgot about them. The girl was able to escape from the hands of her tormentor and declared that she would go on in the company of our hero. She ran towards our character, and he thought that with her appearance, she would quickly attract big trouble. Now it is clear that she too was familiar with our hero, so she looked at him with some admiration. Meanwhile, the rest of the men stood by, not understanding her behavior. But they immediately remembered that this was the same guy who had single-handedly dealt with a huge number of goblins. They began to talk among themselves, and a plan was born to attack our hero, for to them he seemed tired. The next second, one of them called out to our protagonist. In this man's opinion, our hero looked a little shabby, so would he be able to do anything to their group in that condition? This group of young men, like a cunning pack of wolves, felt their superiority. They asked our hero to come over to them before they came over to him. To his nearby friends, our hero explained that he was not surprised by the appearance of these idiots on the other side of the street. After saying that, he confidently walked in their direction, realizing that they were overexcited from their first battle. They didn't seem to realize what kind of opponent they were attacking, blinded by the thought that they could defeat him so easily. The next thing he knew, he was as close as he could get to the man who was talking to him, and he put a hand on his shoulder, telling him that they could be in big trouble. With a sharp tap on his shoulder, he pushed the man aside. As if these actions weren't enough, the next moment our hero showed off his new blade, which shone brightly in the rare sunlight. It seems that his actions have definitely made an impression on these men. The next second, someone emerged from this pack of aggressors and suggested that everyone calm down, assuring them that they were good people. It was the leader of this team. Seeing the strength and determination to fight a large group of men, he suggested that our hero join them. Given the situation, there's something for everyone to do. His words did not surprise our hero, for it was clear from his eyes that this man had already adapted to this place, and there was no point in hiding his true nature. He behaves like a hyena in his habitat. Eventually, such a person will become a criminal. Our hero was ready to deal with this group of men here and now, But in the next moment, he remembered the words of his friends, the wizard and the girl, who had told him that there was no need for senseless killing. However, he should have no pity for the parasites that would plague humanity during the Great War. He also had to care for those he could protect from danger. These memories had influenced his decision, and he thought that he shouldn't fight this group of young men right now. However, such people have a habit of destroying themselves over time if left alone. He abruptly turned and walked away from them, saying goodbye and telling them to get the hell out of this place. Of course, many in this pack of wolves were very surprised by such rudeness, so they were ready to react, but their boss stopped everyone and said that they needed to focus on their main goal of establishing order in this place. This strange place with these unusual monsters and this terrible little devil. This man definitely liked this place because the strong ruled here. So why don't they all take that chance? By now, the conflict was definitely over, and this group of men turned around and walked in the other direction. A young man with blonde hair remarked that many people are more frightening than monsters. Anyway, he knew that our hero was always strange because he was an orphan who always sat in the corner with a dark look on his face. And many, like him, paid no attention to the hero. He caught up with our main character and shouted at him, not understanding why he acted as if he didn't know anyone here. Our hero thought for a second about what to say and said that it had to do with memory loss. His words defused this difficult emotional situation. The girl giggled, and the young man next to her thought he was acting like an old man. The beautiful girl still couldn't stop laughing, and our hero thought that he felt a little sorry for her, because in the ordinary world, she would have had a good life. However, beauty in such a place is a double-edged blade that can be misused. Beauty is a pretty powerful weapon, and he hopes she'll be okay. For some time, they walked in silence with our hero, who led them somewhere ahead. Many people wanted to know where they were going, but he replied with a stern voice that they would soon see everything with their own eyes and understand everything. A moment later, the whole group of young men was very surprised. Finally, they reached our hero's first destination. It was an abandoned subway station where the hidden part is located. They were supposed to explore the place up and down. Our 6 heroes gradually made their way down the stairs to the bottom of this dingy abandoned subway station. The girl was very curious as to why on earth they had come here. Our hero realized that he couldn't waste time explaining everything to them. But without the words of his future friends, he would have gone on alone. However, he had no choice and had to answer something. He explained to the girl that he had been guided by a premonition. His words caused even more surprise in the girl's eyes. Since he had nothing better to do, our hero explained that he now had superpowers in exchange for his lost memories. The next moment, the whole group was surprised to hear such words. After all, what was there to be surprised about when they had just seen a small fairy-flying monster? Some of the group began to whisper to each other, unsure if they should follow this young man. But our hero overheard them and said that he wasn't forcing anyone. He explained to them that he was the kind of person who respected other people's preferences. So if they wanted, they could just stand back and watch from the sidelines. Our hero's words did not go unnoticed by the young man with blonde hair, who was very annoyed by everything he said. However, he privately agreed that this guy probably knew something, so everyone, including him, should go after him. After a moment, they began to descend deeper and deeper, looking around cautiously. It was very dark and damp in here. Some of the newcomers in the group were a little intimidated by this, thinking they were descending into an unsafe place. It's pretty scary in here. But our hero assured them that everything was fine. He explained to everyone that they would be meeting friends who lived here. The young man next to him did not understand our hero's words. Who do you have to be to live in such a strange place? In the next second, our protagonist abruptly stopped and ordered the rest of the team not to move. One of the group members almost stepped on a small monster crawling on the ground. Our hero noticed this and immediately grabbed his new knife, and in the next second, to the great surprise of the young man in the white baize, he destroyed the little monster with one swift blow. He lay on the cold, wet floor for a while, unable to come to his senses after all he had seen. But our hero explained to them that green bugs live in this dungeon, and these bugs, which crawl around here all the time, get out by feeling the vibrations from the surface of the earth. They hate sunlight, so they don't usually crawl outside. At that moment, a small colorless crystal appeared, and our hero picked it up. Everyone was shocked at what happened and looked at our hero with open mouths. He explained to them that if they were bitten by such a bug, all their flesh would be torn apart in no time. They had to remember that. They would have fainted and died before they could do anything. His words startled everyone present, but he had no choice but to tell them the whole truth. He's willing to show them how to deal with these bugs. And in the next second, the warrior destroyed one of the bugs with another swift blow. After that, the rest of the group followed his example and started killing these little green crawling insects. It seems that our hero came up with this as a test to see what skills each member of his party had. He turned his attention to the four of them and thought that, given their abilities, they might make good warriors. However, there was another young man who did not dare to attack the monster in any way. Our hero approached him and explained to him that he should step on whole tiles and not step into cracks that might contain earth. And if he's not sure, it's best not to step on it, but to pierce the spot with his knife. But you should always be careful with your hands. Our girls, on the other hand, had already gotten into the act and were eager to go hunting for green bugs. But this young man hesitated to make the first strike. And while he was thinking about it, a little green bug was already coming his way. It jumped out sharply and tried to bite him in the leg. But in the next instant, our hero didn't let it, and with 2 blows, he chopped the bug to pieces. The young man was thrown aside in horror and thanked our hero. The protagonist concluded that this man had no chance of survival with such fighting skills. He would end up being nothing more than a burden to the entire group. Again, a young man with blonde hair tried to learn our hero's secret. He seemed to know in advance what would happen. Maybe he did have a hidden mystery. Our protagonist again showed his best acting skills and loudly proclaimed that it was his superpower that guided and propelled him. It seemed that now no one had any doubts that our hero really did have some superpowers. He then suggested that the whole group concentrate on hunting and collecting crystals. However, they did not pick them up and left them to our hero. He asked them a question, and they replied that they had decided it would be best if they gave him all the crystals, and he would protect them in return. According to our beauty, who seemed to speak for the whole group, even if they collected all those stones, their abilities wouldn't change much. These words caused a slight irritation to our hero, who said with an exhale that their loot belonged to them alone, and if they wanted to travel with him, they would have to follow some basic rules. All those who have wandered the abyss for decades have created a set of basic rules to help them exist and survive. The first rule is, my prey is mine alone. During group hunts, the item is shared according to need and contribution to the common cause. In a crisis, relationships based on goodwill often fall apart, and people kill each other. Soon these boys will find out just how cruel and vicious this world they have fallen into is. He turned to them and said in a stern voice that they should rely on their own abilities first, and if they're useless, he'll just throw them away. It was one of the basic rules they needed to know. The next moment, our beauty rushed forward to collect the crystals. Her example was immediately followed by the rest of the team. Our hero realized that they would soon get used to it, and there would be no need to explain such obvious things. Pretty soon, they'll be like dogs fighting over a bone, fighting over every new crystal. With interest, the whole group began to collect these gems, and it seems that one of the group members found something very unusual. The young man did not hide his admiration for the beautiful rune he had found, while the others looked on in amazement. It was a beautiful rune with a small salamander inside. The young man thought that if he could find it, he could get superpowers. The young man squinted at our hero, remembering his words about sharing things when hunting together. But he, our hero, will embarrass him if he makes a fuss about it now. With a disparaging smile, the young man looked in our hero's direction and said that he would take the rune for himself. The protagonist nodded, silently letting him know that he approved of his actions. It was a pretty good rune to begin with. Its abilities gave defense and regeneration. Both are very important for survival, so the rune is quite popular. It's also a passive rune. It increases your appetite, but you can also just take away food as you get stronger. The strength and level of a skill is determined by the rank of the rune. Experienced warriors with a variety of magics have hundreds of different skills. The same mage who sent our hero back in time had over 1,000 different skills. However, despite all these rules, our hero's situation was quite different. A long time ago, in one of his past incarnations, he picked up a very beautiful orange rune that had a powerful effect on him. The girl next to him said that she could analyze him and see his skill level. It was 7. If the team members had known this earlier, they could have taught him stronger skills. Of course, having only 7 skills was a fatal limitation. However, our hero had a strength that was incomparable to this weakness. The endless evolution of the skills he learned. For example, a rune that previously only granted fast regeneration now equaled the true art of immortality. And the quick strike rune was now a space-breaking skill. Squad members nicknamed our hero 7 Stars because our hero had a unique characteristic among his skills. It was this characteristic that allowed him to stand in line with the squad of heroes. And our warrior was able to match their strength very quickly, even though he was 20 years behind them. That's the main reason why he was the one who went back in time. Therefore, he had no room for error, and he absolutely had to follow the plan. This time, he had to be careful in choosing the 7 skills to learn. And if everything goes according to plan, he'll get through this training like a walk in the park. From our protagonist's memories, we are once again transported to the present reality, where a young man is happily awaiting the use of this rune. In the next instant, it activated, giving him new abilities and increasing his stats. He could immediately see it on his screen and touched his right hand to his ear. It seemed that the rest of his stats had grown as well. He looked at our hero with some disdain, thinking that he would never give such a thing away. It seems that this young man is just waiting to catch up to the level of his rival. It will happen very quickly, in his opinion. As if reading his mind, our protagonist said that they should keep going. However, he immediately caught up with this young man and said that he would be by his side, putting his hand on his shoulder. After all, he said, it is logical for strong people to go ahead, as if they were on the front lines of battle. Our hero did not hide his inner irritation. Doesn't this guy realize that he's no match for him? However, it wasn't worth letting him do such a thing, so he removed his hand from his shoulder. After that, they walked down the wet stairs for a while, and the girl didn't know where they were going. Our hero replied that they were going to take the subway. His words caused great surprise in the eyes of the beauty, who could not believe that trains still ran. But he assured her that she would soon see for herself. Our hero remembered the guy he used to drink with. Considering how many dungeons he'd been in, he was never wrong. This time, however, a third person entered the conversation, who overheard this young man bragging about his irrelevant knowledge. Then he sat down between them and told them that he wanted to tell them about the fastest way to gain real power. You just had to get your hands on one important thing in the learning zone, and it was somewhere in the subway. The subway stations are laid out and designed differently, but they are basically the same up to the 3rd floor. If you go through the portal in the middle of the stairs and go down to the end, you will find a waiting train. If you make it in time, it's a done deal. The only problem is that it's hard to get to. The train leaves the next day, so our hero had to get to the right place in time for today. After a while, they stumbled upon something very surprising, much to the delight of the whole group. Of course, it was unclear to the rest of the team what the portal was. Our beauty thought to herself that she had been to this subway station many times before, but had never seen anything like it. An obscure entrance and a portal to the unknown. With a slight tremor in her voice, she turned to our hero. Is he really thinking of going in there? Because it is quite unclear what awaits them on the other side of the portal. In a calm voice, our hero replied that he would go where his instincts took him. As he said before, if anyone wants to leave, they can do so at any time. Sure enough, the first person in the group to respond was a young man on a white bike who said he would go with our hero. Immediately, our beauty responded by shouting loudly that she was ready to go as well. It was clear to our hero from her demeanor and expression that she was beginning to worry. She had certain reasons. With her appearance, she could get into big trouble, so she was in even more danger than everyone else. And this girl is well aware that she needs to get stronger as soon as possible. However, not all of the team members shared this enthusiasm. One of the girls decided to stay here, since no one is forbidden to just keep hunting. The young man with the headphones around his neck hesitantly said he would go down as well. His words made one of the group laugh, because it was hard to do anything serious with such a frightened look. But this guy wouldn't give up and said that it was none of your business how he chose to surrender in this situation. His words provoked a fit of anger from his opponent, who declared that he had too much idle chatter for such a useless traveling companion, and he's not going to go behind him and help him in his battles. Our hero interrupted their conversation and told them to stop their useless chatter immediately. They have very little time. They could do whatever they wanted, but they had to move forward. It was clear that the tantrum was caused by being insulted in the presence of a beautiful girl. After a moment, the group passed through this portal and found themselves on the other side, in a new room. There were thousands of different levels in the training area, and the terrain could vary greatly. However, the common factor was still present. As our hero expected, he saw a grocery store in front of him, which, to the surprise of the rest of the team, was somehow working at that time. Why would he be here? There was no way for the members of the group to understand. Finally, our heroes were able to enter this amazing shop full of merchandise. The rumor that there is always a shop on the second floor of the subway turned out to be true. It must be some kind of prize. While the others scattered around the store, exploring the shelves of merchandise, our hero found a backpack for himself. One of the group went to the hardware section. He wondered if he should take more of the different types of knives. At the same time, our hero was examining the merchandise in this deserted store. Main character was looking for certain items, and after a while he found kitchen utensils and a small gas stove. The wizard was right. This place looked more like a real supermarket than a convenience store. It has literally everything you could possibly need. Our hero took a small pot and seemed to be cooking something. His eager actions aroused great interest in the girl, who inquired what he was doing. In his usual manner, he replied briefly that he was just cooking, and then pulled out a large bag. Apparently, this bag contained the ingredients for a unique dish. The next moment, the girl was very surprised by what she saw, as it was the blood of the green worms they had fought earlier. It seems that our hero knew what he was doing, so he carefully measured out the necessary proportions. Now, our beauty realized that the squad leader was collecting green worms for a reason. Besides, our hero still had some goblin skin with him. It became extremely poisonous when it came into contact with green blood, so he wanted to add this ingredient to his dish. Goblins have evolved to survive against green worms, and their poison is quite strong. This pleasant cooking smell was noticed by one of the party members, who was always trying to please our hero. But in the next second, he retreated sharply when he learned that our hero was about to prepare the strongest poison. The girl looked at her longtime friend with admiration, for neither of them had ever thought of cooking such a thing. I wonder how our hero knew the recipe for this poison? The leader's regular and curmudgeonly answer made the young man very angry, because he wanted to know much more. It was clear to him that the protagonist was evading answers. But this knowledge was not given for free. There were so many of them that at times it seemed that my head would explode from the sheer number of them. Our hero received special instructions from a mage who gave him only the most essential information to improve the items he needed. While the other members of the party were dying of boredom from the mage's lectures, it seems that only our hero was scrutinizing this secret information that could not be shared with anyone. The wizard tried very hard to cram as much knowledge into our hero's head as possible in a short amount of time before sending him back in time. Knowing the future will only hasten the destruction of the abyss. The magician's instructions also indicated that our hero did not need to become Prometheus, for knowledge was only worth sharing as planned, when necessary. The wave of memories passed, and our hero stared intently at his reflection in this wonderfully poisonous broth. He seemed to know the exact proportions and cooking time, otherwise the recipe would have been useless. After a moment, he added some of the broth to the dispenser to wet his weapon. Naturally, the other members of the group wanted to get their hands on this poison for future battles. Everyone froze in anticipation of their group leader's reaction. However, our hero surprised them by demanding half a strength or stamina stone for each use of the poison. The young man was furious and began to shout at the group leader that he was very fickle. Ignoring his emotions, our protagonist continued to bottle the poison. He could give them the poison for free, but it was a bad idea in the long run. Our hero told the whole group about it. Because in this world, relationships without mutual benefit always break down quickly. The clever beauty wanted to borrow some of the potion to pay our hero back with runes. He seemed to like the idea and offered her the filled bottle. However, she had to be very careful, because if this poison got on her hands, it would hurt a lot. Not everyone in the group shared our hero's generosity. Perhaps the young man would even steal one of the bottles later. They had no choice but to follow the girl's example. So they began to ask our hero to give them another bottle. The next moment, the members of our group were already sharing this bottle among themselves, while our hero was making other preparations before going into battle. Now that he was fully prepared, he put a small backpack on his back and picked up another bag. The next second, he was surprised by what he saw. His squad members were carrying many bags and suitcases with a lot of stuff on them. Are they camping, or do they want to be some kind of bait? Why were they carrying so many suitcases? His words and remarks made the girl laugh. As an experienced warrior, our hero suggested that if they don't want to fight for the rest of their lives, they should bury their belongings here. Besides, if they take too many things from this shop, they will be harassed by other people who also need things. The girl never stopped admiring our hero. At first, she thought he was just quiet, but it turned out that he's a great fighter. However, she was a little disappointed that she couldn't get superpowers. As she buried her belongings, she began to think about the future. Hundreds of millions of people had disappeared until yesterday, but none of them had ever been found. Would she have to survive here for the rest of her life? Either way, one thing was clear to her. She certainly didn't want to die here. So she would do whatever it took to survive in this treacherous and vicious world. All the more, she had every chance of becoming an excellent warrior next to such a leader. Without waiting for the others to finish burying their belongings, she and our hero began to leave the place. Her behavior did not go unnoticed by the young man, who kept accusing our hero of acting like the navel of the earth. With undisguised annoyance, he threw his backpack to another member of the group and offered to carry it for him. He quickly caught up with our pair and again loudly addressed the group leader. Perhaps they, and he personally, could gain some sort of superpower. He was eager to learn from our hero. The group leader replied that it was possible. All three of them were surprised and delighted to hear such news. For the first time in a long time, their eyes shone with joy and anticipation of something excellent. They began to remember the words of our hero, who had told them earlier that among all the people who had come to this world, there were those who had been able to develop certain superpowers that they had not had before. He remembered again the wizard's admonition to get rid of anyone who would be of no use to him on this time journey. The thought hit him like a bolt of lightning, and he seemed to want to take out one of the team members. Or maybe all of them. The young man continued to hurt our hero and realized that he had become quite rude. In his opinion, our hero was still angry with him. Probably because he had been angry with him in the beginning. But the squad leader wasn't in the mood for a conversation and replied that he wasn't used to it. He had already said all he wanted to say. Then he started to walk away. We understand how hard it was for him before, because in the last 5 years before he was sent here, in the battles with the increasing number of monsters from the abyss, hope was gradually replaced by despair. And despair tended to drown out all emotion. That's why he became the way he did. Dull, quiet, and silent. But the rest of us didn't know. So they thought maybe he got hit on the head in the battle, and that's why he was acting so strange. However, the battle for leadership kept the young man, who also wanted to have superpowers, busy. He was a very treacherous man by nature. He'd thought of everything in advance. A little later, in his introduction, he will date a girl, get rid of another member of the group, and after that he will command the already former leader of the group, our main character. However, in the next second his fantasies are abruptly interrupted by a cry of our hero, who orders everyone to stop. The squad leader discovered something very strange. It was a slime, and judging by the type of slime, it didn't belong to a sword snail, as there was no pungent sour smell. Besides, our hero didn't see any half-dried entrails anywhere, so it definitely wasn't a cut-up zombie. That left only one possibility. This slime belonged to a land mermaid. While the squad leader examined the footprints on the ground, everyone else watched in silence. Our hero was now certain that these were the tracks of a land mermaid. These monsters were particularly slow, but once any of the party had received a dose of paralyzing poison, these fearsome creatures would have no trouble eviscerating the entire team in a second. However, this was not a new situation for our hero, and he had his own plan to get back on his feet. One of the group members once again reprimanded our hero for acting like an idiot, and that he should have given more information to everyone else. But the leader of the group again confidently ordered them to follow him because they would be very surprised by what they would see. They should help him with his plan. For a while, all three of them froze in silence because they didn't understand what the plan was. However, our hero told them that it was a special incendiary mixture in bottles that would help them a lot in the near future. Of course, they didn't have any gasoline, but he used another substance to make a fiery cocktail. The first to notice this was our beauty, who exclaimed in surprise that the incendiaries were in front of her. Was our hero really able to make them in advance from store-bought items? Thinking that this was also part of our protagonist's superpower, the young man examined the strange bottle with a long wick. He began to flatter our hero again, saying that perhaps he liked it better here than on his homeworld because he could do whatever he wanted. He almost started bragging about what he would do in our hero's shoes if he had the same superpowers. But in the next instant, the stern look of the group leader made him realize that he was saying the wrong thing. The protagonist took another deep breath and stopped his desire to quickly deal with this guy. Then he began to draw a plan on the floor for the group to follow. They had to listen very carefully. One of them will throw a fire cocktail, and then the other three will come forward and attack those monsters. The person in the vanguard will have priority in distributing the runes. The young man interrupted our hero and confidently declared that he was the one who would be in the vanguard. However, in his opinion, it should be done by someone competent, shouldn't it? It seemed that the group leader had no choice but to agree. Now it was time to decide who would throw the cocktail. The girl and the guy with the headphones raised their hands at the same time, then looked at each other quickly, not knowing who would throw first. She looked at him with her enchanting feminine gaze, with big eyes like the cat in the Shrek cartoon. The young man could not utter a word in this situation, so our hero had to intervene and give them the task of throwing cocktails in turn. A moment later, they were moving forward again through the long, dark corridors of this dungeon. The young man at the back of the group realized that they had come a long way. He couldn't say that he wanted to go back. He went with them because he didn't want them to leave him, and now he had no choice but to fulfill all the demands of the group leader. However, he never ceased to admire the beauty and self-confidence of the only girl in the group who set the right example for him with all her actions. The squad leader briefly explained that the monsters were on their way, so the entire squad should get ready. Of course, at this point, a cold sweat ran down the backs of many. Our hero then ordered the girl to throw one of the cocktails in the direction of the sound. Like a mantra, she repeated to herself that she didn't want to be a burden, and with trembling hands she managed to light the fuse. She looked forward confidently, and in the next instant threw her cocktail. The Molotov shattered right in front of one of the monster's eyes. In the next second, hot tongues of flame destroyed the creature. She screamed happily that she had succeeded in destroying one of the slugs, while our hero and another member of the group rushed in to attack. The group leader reminded them to be very careful and cautious, as these creatures spit paralyzing venom. The young man's rush forward was so fast that he quickly destroyed several snails in the next instant. The young man once again envied our hero and thought about preventing him from taking all the runes, but by that time, one of the monsters he couldn't see had already crept up on him. In the next second, this terrifying monster lunged at the young man and tried to bite him. He barely had time to dodge the attack, and in the next second, with a quick swing of his knife, he destroyed the monster. He was happy to see the effects of the powerful poison in action. Standing in the circle of destroyed monsters, our hero continued to collect gems. It was obvious to him that this poison was very effective. Looking at his perfect knife, the young man thought that with this potion, he could quickly catch up with our hero's skills. After that, our two heroes got into a real frenzy and started a fierce battle with these monsters. One by one, these terrifying creatures were killed by our hero's weapons, while the girl and the young man skillfully threw their fiery cocktails, creating big bright flashes all around. As expected, in a battle against an enemy using paralyzing poison, the use of flaming cocktails was a good idea. Although our hero's blade was already dulled, it didn't matter because he had prepared his poison for the purpose of quickly killing monsters. The young man enjoyed fighting these monsters so much that he anticipated his prey and looked at the gems. As soon as he reached out to grab his new prey, one of the monsters spat its paralyzing poison at him. The poisonous liquid hit his leg like some kind of acid, damaging part of his pants. He fell to the ground and could not move. After that, all he could do was watch as the terrifying monster that was about to attack him approached in his direction. And it wasn't just one, there were so many of them. And they were sneaking up on him too fast and too close. So he got very scared and backed away. Not just cold sweat, but an intense animal fear swept over his entire body. And with all his strength, he shouted loudly for the monsters to leave him alone. He called for help from the rest of the team, but the girl seemed to have run out of her cocktails, so she turned to the guy with the headphones, who still had a bottle. He tried to use his lighter, but this time it didn't work, and the flint wouldn't give a spark. And the moment his lighter worked and a small flame came out, he saw the face of this monster before his eyes, which frightened him greatly, whereupon he dropped the only remaining bottle from his hands. It fell far away from the injured hero and broke, causing anger and strong reproaches against the fellow. But at that very moment, someone's sharp, swift kick cut the monster in half and destroyed it instantly. It was our hero who calmed everyone down and told them to stick to the plan. He once again rescued the members of his party. Standing next to the frightened newcomer, he reassured him that he should listen to the leader and there would be no problems. This time the battle was over, and the protagonist suggested that they take a break and collect all their gems. The young man still couldn't get up because the paralyzing poison was still working on his legs. However, his body was gradually returning to normal as his skills were helping him very quickly. Standing next to the scattered runes on the ground, our hero noted that if he increased his stamina, he would be able to rest and recover faster. He then added that the party members should collect their gems and move on. The young man was finally able to get to his feet and was very pleased with the amount of gems on the ground. However, intense envy and greed gripped his mind, and he was about to take the stones that belonged to another member of the party. He turned to a young man wearing headphones who was diligently picking up his stones and began to rebuke and taunt him. The next second, he grabbed the young man by the throat with a sharp movement of his hand and demanded that he hand over all his stones. He squeezed his hand tighter and tighter and seemed to enjoy it. However, the young man could hardly breathe. With a very angry look, he looked at him as if he were his future victim, and then declared that this guy couldn't even throw a normal fire shake. Maybe he'd forgotten that he almost died because of it. Anymore, and the young man would have passed out from lack of air. The next second, however, the girl called out to him. "What the hell are you doing?" She ordered him to let go. I mean, he could literally strangle him right now. The girl's words had an effect on him, and in the next second, he threw the poor man to the ground with a sudden movement. His headphones came off. The young man on the ground could barely catch his breath, but his assailant continued to threaten him, telling him that he should have been more careful and reasonable next time. There was no way his anger and rage would subside. He grabbed this poor man by the hair and told him that not long ago he was crawling around with his head down and seemed to have forgotten where his seat was. He ordered him to follow the strong, as his father had once done, and not to show off. But he hardly had time to stretch out his hand to take the stones from the poor fellow, when in the next second, with a sharp throw, our hero's knife was thrust into the ground between them. Extending his finger forward, the squad leader declared in a threatening, stern voice that this was not his share, so it was not worth getting involved here. But the young man began to argue with him. Did he really want to give these gems to such a lowlife? According to him, it was like throwing the runes into the garbage. He felt that this group member had done nothing to deserve them, so he suggested that our hero share them with them. Gritting his teeth in anger, he expected some sort of reaction from our hero. But coolly, the squad leader said that the distribution had to be fair and that he had no right to interfere with anyone's means of survival. It seems that the young man was not satisfied with this answer and turned and walked away, saying that our hero might regret this decision later. The squad leader then looked at the weak link and said that he should learn to assert his position and stake. His words calmed the young man, and he began to gather his stones. Sensing the emotional tension in the air, the girl turned to our hero. Doesn't he think they're bothering him? Given the situation, She thought that our hero might be annoyed to see them bickering all the time. But he replied again very coldly and briefly that it was all right, and he would not complain about what they were really bad at. But she was curious if his answer meant that he would travel with them to the end. By her hunch and keen intuition, it seemed to her that our hero might leave them at any moment. Without turning to face her, he replied that they were the ones who had chosen to follow him, not he. They're all doing pretty well, so she shouldn't worry about it. Most of the fallen stones increase strength and endurance. However, the characteristics of the body should not be ignored. Therefore, the stones he found weren't too bad considering how much strength and stamina he had right now. These two parameters were extremely important. He activated his statistics screen again to see the current numbers. However, in the next second, a small devil appeared above his head. Very happily, this cute monster said that the sum of our hero's strength and stamina exceeded 50. A system alert appeared in front of our squad leader's eyes. He had received his first achievement. That's why the little devil appeared here to congratulate him on this accomplishment. The little flying creature immediately recognized our hero as the traveler who was not afraid and was the first to raise his hand during the training. In this monster's opinion, our hero was indeed very fast, and it seems that he was not wrong about him. As he continued to circle around our hero, he kept complimenting him and telling him that they were very fond of those who tried their best. When he landed on the squad leader's hair, the little monster said that he wanted to give him a small gift for being the most active traveler. But the girl heard his words and said that it was a bit unfair in such a situation, since they had different characteristics to begin with. She said this with a trembling voice, and it was obvious that she was very insecure. With a sweet, friendly look, the little devil looked in her direction and said there was no need to be afraid because he hadn't even touched her yet. However, the creature immediately approached her and told the girl that they don't kill people just because they don't like them. But the next second, he whispered in her ear with a demonic voice that there was always an exception to the rule, and maybe that exception would be her. After saying that, the girl was very scared and the little monster started spinning around her and laughing out loud. Of course, he was only joking. It was such a joke. The little creature began to play along, telling her that the girl was probably wrong. Pointing sharply in her direction, he said that she too was unique in some ways compared to others, but for some reason she was in no hurry to get rid of it to be on par with the others. She looked extremely puzzled and confused. Of course, life here was always so unfair. Anyway, enough of wasting time with idle chatter. It's time to reward our hero. But our hero was not surprised at all, because he already knew what the reward would be. In a demonic voice, the creature explained that the reward was for overcoming a certain number in the combination of physical characteristics. There were 3 runes to choose from. Our hero was unemotional after those words. What kind of runes does he want? Maybe he wants agility, or maybe he wants to increase his perception, or maybe he's interested in healing. This rune is always expendable, but it can heal a hole in your stomach and protect you from most poisons. It's like having a spare life. However, this stone will be useless for a severed limb. The rest of the group had listened to the little monster's long monologue in silence. The words about the healing rune took our heroes by surprise. Does it really mean that one can survive a deadly situation at least once and still be alive? Maybe in such a situation, if things go wrong, our hero will use this rune on at least one of them to save his life. However, in the next second, our hero's words abruptly cut short all their expectations. He wanted to be rewarded with a rune that was immune to magic. His words surprised the little devil, who immediately declared that such a rune was of course available, much to the dismay of the rest of the group. In our hero's opinion, the healing runes were useful, but immunity to magic and physical damage is hard to come by in the training area, unless you're as lucky as the most experienced warrior. The increase in stamina only affects the expenditure and recovery of your strength, while resistance to magic and physical damage is a much more fundamental defense, i.e. immunity. Of course, with experience, our hero will be able to withstand physical attacks, but magical attacks are another matter. He activated the screen again to check his vital signs. It seems that this was enough to avoid immediate death. After that, the little monster got ready to leave, saying with a smile that he was really counting on our hero. Besides, in the little devil's opinion, Our hero was handsome and he should keep it that way. Such words did not go unnoticed by the rest of the team, who thought that this little flying monster was a girl. After the monster disappeared, our hero turned to his companions to tell them to continue on their way. However, he saw their laughing faces and didn't realize what was going on. For the first time in a long time, all three of them laughed at the monster's words. After a while, our entire team once again fought the many enemies that came their way. This time, it was much easier for the girl to fight. She noticed our hero gathering something, perhaps cooking poison again. However, she noticed that his movements didn't change. Why did that happen? She was curious, since he had received a lot of runes. Then why did his speed remain the same? Our hero immediately revealed his secret, raising his right hand and revealing that it contained all the runes he had collected earlier. With her mouth open in surprise, she looked in his direction and didn't realize what it was. He explained that it was a special way to store runes. It was worth reaching out and thinking about storing the runes, because the special symbols on them immediately appeared. Naturally, she was curious to know how our hero knew about it. He again answered that it was because of his superpowers. Then he added that one should not repeat such manipulations. Of course, the girl was curious to know why, and he answered that it would slow down the hunt, so you wouldn't be able to keep many runes. And secondly, the runes would lose all meaning if he died, so he kept them in such a special way to save them for the future. Everyone was curious to know what kind of future he was saving them for. Our hero replied that he would exchange them later. And although it will be problematic to do so now, once the rules of the game are established, these runes can be used as a substitute for money in the tutorial area. Our heroes shouldn't have to do this. These runes were worth using one at a time without collecting them like he did. His words had enraged the young man, who still blamed him for our hero looking down on them. Can't he do what he wants and still have to listen to the group leader? After his words, our hero realized that they hadn't figured out where they were yet, so he decided to dot all the I's. He drew his gun and, looking in their direction, said that they should listen to him carefully. They could follow him, or they could collect these gems. They can do whatever they want. He doesn't care. But right now he wants them to listen to him. So in the next second, he asked them to give him their weapons. This time, too, the young man, without hiding his emotions, expressed his displeasure, thinking that the protagonist had decided to rob them. After all, he had his own gun. Why did he ask them to give him their weapons? Our hero explained that they could no longer fight with this weapon because the blade was too crude, making it practically useless. Besides, he needed more knives for his next task. A new fit of rage gripped the young man, who lashed out at the squad leader. Does he really think he can afford this? If he takes their weapons, what will they use to fight back? Would they really have to fight with their bare hands? Or maybe he wants them to stand behind his back and just suck his fingers. It won't work that way. However, the young man with the headphones did not share this opinion. So he decided to give our hero his blade after all. The girl did the same. Despite the threats of this brave young man, the other members of the crew did not listen to him. At that moment, the air became very hot, as the young man turned to face our hero, taking a fighting stance. With a grin, the squad leader told him that he seemed to want to fight him. The young man replied that of course he did, for he had nothing to fear. He'd always hated his condescending look. Well, our hero expected him to say no, even though this guy has absolutely no idea what awaits him downstairs. Meanwhile, the young man was once again furious that the protagonist would ignore him, even at such a moment. Nevertheless, the protagonist decided to draw a line in the sand. He then told them that he would give them two options to choose from. In the first, he leaves and they do the rest on their own. In the second option, and here he was pointing at this upstart, they would stand back and watch him go after the next monster alone. Well, the choice was theirs, after which he silently looked in their direction. With a quiver in his voice, the young man with the headphones announced that he would stay back after all. The girl said she would follow the same decision. Apparently, it's really dangerous down there, according to our hero. However, this brave young man tried to convince them that they should all fight together and help each other in these difficult times. It seems that the squad leader wants to leave all his friends behind and take the trophies for himself. Would they really let him do that? But deep down, He was worried because the odds were not in his favor. Two people on the team had made a wiser decision than he had. The word he called him did not escape our hero. It was the word friend. Sure, they had once been friends. But this young man should have been glad that it wasn't the same wizard who came here. By now, he'd be somewhere in the blue or even purple zone. And our hero was still here. He had to get there as soon as possible. He had to get into another zone. Then he abruptly interrupted his thoughts and told the squad members that they had plenty of time to think, so they should go downstairs. His words pleased the young man, for our hero had finally come to a decision. Considering how eager he is to go down, the creep probably knows what's out there. In his opinion, only a fool would refuse such a chance to go down into that dark and unknown dungeon. But the next second, all three of them ran back upstairs with a terrified scream, because what they had seen had frightened them badly. And in the next moment, something hissed and rushed, and right above their heads appeared a huge, giant, terrifying cobra with big red eyes. None of them would have thought that the next monster would be such a beast of a completely different level of strength. Dazed with horror, the entire crew stared at this terrifying reptile in silence. They quickly ran for safety, and the young man couldn't believe that the squad leader was going to fight this monster alone. This guy seems to be out of his mind. But the very stern and belligerent look of our hero makes it clear that he knows what he is about to do. The battle with the giant cobra begins. The fearsome monster began to move on the ground, raising large clouds of dust, while our hero dropped his backpack and pulled out a knife, preparing for battle. In the next second, the snake took in a lot of air through its nostrils and prepared to spit something special in the hero's direction. Knowing its habits, he activated his magical defense. At that moment, a huge red magical beam flew at him, hitting the protective shield and leaving him unharmed. However, the stones next to him were scattered in all directions. Of course, he had expected that kind of behavior from that snake, so he checked his vitals. Thanks to his immunity to magic, he survived. The snake continued to make horrible noises and hissed loudly. Strong sound waves echoed throughout the room. It had special scales that a simple blade could not penetrate. However, it had some weaknesses. Our hero realized that this was a very difficult opponent. Running around the snake with his dagger, he found a vulnerable spot to stab. That spot was the scales. They were solid, but there was no gap between them. One after another, our hero struck, and the snake let out a terrible scream, then screamed even more in pain. Its large mouth contained not only poisonous fangs full of dangerous substances, but also sharp teeth. And it really wanted to get at our hero. So, in the next second, she unleashed her powerful magic strike again, knocking the squad leader aside. However, the protagonist continued to enrage this huge snake by throwing rocks at it from time to time. Once again, the snake unleashed a powerful attack with its red beam of magic. Large chunks of rock flew around, but our hero was able to stay on his feet and block the blows thanks to his immunity to magic. Even with such a good defense, our hero had a hard time defending himself. However, in the next second, the snake gave him a little surprise and made a very powerful slash with its tail, like a loud crack of a whip. This blow was so powerful that it threw our hero deep into the rocks. Snake watched for a while as clouds of dust swirled around our squad leader. After taking some damage, the young man noticed that the snake was beginning to respond to the wounds by increasing its aggression. Even though it was a training zone, our hero was still very vulnerable to its venom despite his high physical defense. He stood up again and counted his weapons. He only had 5 blades left. And before the effects of the poison manifested in the snake's body, why not have some fun with them now? He prepared for another attack. At that time, while the girl was standing in a safe place, she heard some very frightening sounds coming from somewhere below. The sounds of incessant fighting. She was very worried about our hero because he was there all alone. They had to get out of here, so the young man gave her a stern look. They didn't even have a dagger, so the best solution was to leave the place and return to the shop. But the girl seemed to have a different plan. Despite her fear, she rushed towards our hero. It seems that this time, the confident young man could not leave the girl alone, so despite his anger, he decided to help her and rush down the stairs with her. Just then, The guy with the headphones also ran after them. As she made her way down the stairs, she kept calling out our hero's name. She was very curious to know if he was okay. But in the next second, she stopped abruptly and a terrible fear took over her eyes. What she saw shocked her. The very cobra our protagonist was fighting had its poisonous teeth firmly clenched around his arm. Only now, at close range, could the girl see that he was badly injured and covered in blood. All the members of our team looked at the protagonist with horror, and he looked at them in silence, unable to move, being bitten by this huge monster. It seems that this fight has been going on for too long. So in the next second, our hero makes a very powerful blow with his dagger right into the mouth of this huge snake. The monster screams in pain and our hero is thrown aside. He manages to regroup and get to his feet, only to find that the snake is about to attack again. It took him 3 whole knives. It chewed on his arm a bit, but he had built up some stamina and would recover quickly. He also had a torn jacket, but that was the least of his problems. In the later stages, there will be monsters with such high resistance that the poison will not affect them at all. And if they're also using different skills, it'll be even more complicated. But in the early stages, the poison is very effective. He couldn't have done it without it. And in the next instant, the terrible snake fell to the ground with a tremendous rumble. Finally, our hero was able to defeat this monstrous monster. His face was still covered in blood, and the girl rushed over to help him. But as if nothing had happened, he picked up his backpack and asked her in passing why she had decided to come down here. It was clear from the hero's demeanor that he was fine, but the girl was very curious to know what condition his arm was in. To the delight of the rest of the group, our hero replied that it was just a scratch, and there was nothing to worry about as it was already healing. The young man got up close and personal with the snake, noting its size and how our hero was fighting it. He realized to himself that the leader of the group was strong enough, but to handle such a creature alone was truly a great feat. His only concern now was how quickly he could catch up with our hero's skills. The protagonist picked up a rune from the ground that was given to him as a reward. It was a beautiful stone with the image of the cobra he had just defeated. The stronger the monster, the better the reward. A new system message informed him that this rune was called Spiky Snake Shockwave. It was a pretty useful magic rune at first, but he didn't want to use it because it needed mana. With a sarcastic smile, the young man asked him if our hero was going to absorb this skill right now. He replied that he wouldn't. After all, he could only use 7 runes, and there was no point in taking up storage space with something like that. Besides, if he used this rune, he would have to shoot out of his mouth like a snake. Suddenly, a young man wearing headphones entered the conversation and asked our hero to give him the rune. However, he was immediately elbowed in the lip and thrown aside as another member of the group tried to take the rune for himself. They began to argue among themselves as to who would possess the stone, as if our hero had already agreed to give it to them. In the opinion of this cocky young man, his opponent will not even be able to use this rune properly because he is always standing on the sidelines, trembling, afraid to take active action. Realizing that there was probably going to be another conflict, the girl decided to jump into their conversation and calm them down, telling them to stop fighting. She asked them to do so. Now our hero also approached them and asked them what they were doing. Was he going to give them the rune? He didn't seem to have such a task. He decided to make a joke and defuse the situation by saying that if they bought the rune for themselves, they would get a 5% discount. Maybe some of them are interested? They immediately stopped arguing and turned to our hero. Of course, they didn't have that much money. Perhaps it would be possible to buy this rune in installments. Our hero jokingly replied that only with a guarantee, but if they wanted, they could buy it all at once. After a while, he asked the girl about the decision the group members had made. She told him that she wanted to take the rune for herself, i.e. buy it from him. But that was just a test. Just as our hero thought, these two guys don't trust each other. Therefore, she remains the only option that hides her certain abilities, especially since our hero had seen her absorb the rune of mana once, and since she knocked it out herself, she didn't even need to hide it. However, he realizes that the more cards she has up her sleeve, the better for her. It's a survival instinct. She seems to have a pretty good sense of where she's landed. She then held out the gems in her hand to our hero and said that there were 3 runes each of dexterity and perception, as well as 7 more runes of stamina and strength. The group leader replied that he would give her a 5% discount, so he would only take 6 power runes. He then extended his hand and began to absorb the magic stones. The girl was very happy to hear his words, as it was very generous to her. He explained to the rest of the team that it was not such an expensive price to pay. If they get into the habit of getting everything for free, they won't last long in this place. The girl examined the magic rune, which glowed brightly and even blinded her a bit. Wasting no time, our hero turned and walked the other way. It was clear to him that the presence of such a spiky snake in this place could not pass without a trace. This meant that there was a special or somewhere nearby. Luckily, he had noticed it before, so these huge, beautiful crystals were a real gift to him. So he boldly broke off a large piece and took it for himself. At that time, the other members of the team were silently watching our hero, thinking that he was once again demonstrating his superpowers. They did not understand why he needed the crystal, as they were not as experienced as our hero. But they had no time to figure it out, so the very next second, our hero sharpened his knife and walked towards the snake, intending to perform certain manipulations with it. Again, they watched his actions in silence and with interest, not knowing what he would do next. After a short time, our hero removed all the scales from the snake and was about to prepare another potion. Perhaps one of the party members thought he was going to brew poison again, but the party leader replied that he was going to brew something different this time. The spiky snake scales are quite powerful, but they can't be used as a weapon, so you'll have to make a new one. These were 11 of the 134 weapon combinations that could be made from the materials obtained in the first training area. Using the knowledge he had previously learned from the tutorial, he was able to create a large rapier. Although this weapon had a low kill zone, and it was unlikely to make monsters bleed a lot, if you know the enemy's weaknesses and know how to strike accurately, this rapier is the best choice. Although the tip of this sword was not as sharp as he expected, it was still good because he had made it himself. He struck this rapier against his dagger several times and realized that it had enough durability to be used in combat. Considering how long it had taken the alchemists of the past to create the best weapons out of the worst materials from the very beginning of their training, he didn't even have to complain in such a situation. He will really need this sword when he meets a very dangerous monster that guards the second part of the dungeon. Our hero did not hide his happiness because he finally got a useful weapon. For the rest of the party, watching our hero all the time, it was a truly amazing scene. His magic spells did not go unnoticed by the young man, who looked at our hero in surprise. He asked him if the weapon was for sale. He was ready to give all the runes he had at that moment. Seeing how much effort the squad leader had put into creating this weapon, the young man was certain that it was many times better than his current blade. Our hero replied that this sword was difficult to use. Sure, he could sell it, but he had already used up all the ingredients and wouldn't be able to make another one. Such words made the young man angry once again. Of course, he thought that our hero was a real egoist, using all the essence for himself. However, he believes that with battles like this, there will be more to come. We just have to wait. Apparently, they were coming to some sort of logical conclusion. There's electricity here, and there was a train waiting for them, and the guy who was always on guard before was quiet now. So it looks like there won't be any more monsters. All that's left is to collect your reward. They followed our hero inside, but he stopped them with his question because he didn't expect them to get into the train with him. He asked them to come out, as there was only room for one. He looked sternly in their direction and wondered if they hadn't heard him. He repeated that only one could go, so he asked them to get out. They didn't understand how he could be so sure of what he was saying, since in their opinion the train was very big. How could he know that only one person could go? Once again, the cocky young man started yelling at our hero, not understanding why he had to go alone. After all that had happened to them, he was making the decision alone again. He reminded him loudly that they were the ones who helped him get here. Our hero rose from his seat and looked in their direction. He seemed to be hurt by these words. How naive they were, he thought. There was still so much they didn't know. Did they really think they could help him instead of the other way around? With small swings of his rapier, he told them that no one had ever said that he should be the one to ride. Then he loudly banged the hilt of his weapon on the ground and proclaimed that there were no laws in this world. Then, in an orderly tone, he told them to get off the train, or he would help them do it. And while they're out there resting, they can talk to their lawyer and come back to him later with a formal complaint. It seems that this time our hero didn't mess around and pointed his sword right in this young man's face. All three of them looked at the train that had just left the platform. Of course, the young man was as angry as ever, calling our hero the most obscene names. A little earlier, when the train was still on the platform, the young man had looked at the squad leader with a stare of utter contempt. He didn't think he could just drive off and leave them alone. Of course, if they joined forces, they would have a chance to attack him. They could win, take all of his weapons, and then all of our hero's runes would be theirs. If he lost, he would just apologize to the team, because in his opinion, our hero was a good man and couldn't hurt him. His hand grabbed the knife. However, in the next second, all of his fantasies were abruptly cut short because our hero looked at him with his special, powerful battle gaze. It seemed to the young man that if he moved, the protagonist could easily eliminate him. With a sarcastic smile, the squad leader said that he would see them upstairs a little later. Standing alone on the platform, already without the squad leader, our beauty explained that they wanted too much from him because they had only gotten this far thanks to our protagonist. Therefore, they should not have been so rude to him. She then suggested that the whole group go back upstairs. However, this young man seemed to have a plan of his own. He wanted to become stronger by any means necessary. He believed that the end justified the means. And isn't that the point, to get stronger by any means necessary? To summarize the information about this train, it boils down to this. 1. The train goes through 20 stations and stops at each one. 2nd, the objects in each station are random. 3rd, once you pass a station, you can't go back. Even for our experienced hero, this put an extra psychological pressure on him. If he made it to the end, there was absolutely no guarantee that he would be able to find something good, so he had to be careful. Nevertheless, he was already at Station 12 and had to decide where to get off. He had the ability to get completely different weapons. There was a special diadem, special knight's claws, and steel gauntlets. In total, there were 8 weapons. These were not bad items for the hidden area of this place. However, the tiara alone is very useful in the beginning, as it vaguely indicates the weaknesses of the monsters. But since our hero already knows such places, this weapon was of no interest to him. He needed something else, something very special. Of course, he'd want a weapon that would give him more freedom of movement. Still thinking about his future find, he decided to go to the next station. And in the next second, he was surprised to see an unexpected object in front of him. This particular item was a sweet craze. They were 20 small, unique cigarettes, each of which allowed him to greatly increase his stats. And during the use of just one cigarette, all his numbers would continue to rise steadily. After the first puff, his performance would increase by 20% for 10 minutes. It was just what he needed. He happily picked up the small purple package. And even though this item could not be used outside the training area, there was nothing better here. He hadn't found anything like this in a long time, so he was extremely happy with the find. A new wave of memories washed over our hero. It reminded him of the past, when one of his squad members had criticized him for overusing such items. The image of this charming girl seemed to appear before his eyes. She was incredibly beautiful, and he looked at her with some admiration. But these were only his memories of that past, which was actually the future, a past that will never exist again. But this time it will be completely different, and he will try to make the best of it. After some time, the young man returned to the place he started from and found that his unit was gone. The next hidden area will be available in 4 days, so you can focus on 2 things in that time. He could farm valuable items and collect gems at the same time. Or maybe he should take care of one of his remaining tasks. In this world, small pots and gas burners were especially valuable to our hero, so he found one again and put it in his backpack. He decided to start with the tasks that give good rewards. And the most important thing is that you can finish this task faster and get the best reward. He remembered the special sage stone. It was a red-colored ruby made by an incompetent mage. It increased all stats by 10 and could also heal all wounds, whether fatal or not. It was an amazing bounty that was hard to get in the training zone, and even in the next zone, the red zone, This stone was very rare. But who had completed this crazy quest earlier? He remembered that it was a very interesting girl. She was a member of the death squad and used to volunteer at the prison, but she fell into the abyss with the rest of the criminals. Although she had people with her that she had trusted for a long time, once her training began, she was betrayed by everyone. Afterwards, in a wild rage, she tore apart all of her former friends who were prisoners for 7 days. She was able to deal with each one and eliminate them all. But when no one else was left, she tried to lay hands on herself. She's completely insane and out of control. That's how she accomplished this task and earned such a valuable reward. But our hero couldn't go that way. Such a task did not suit him. It was contrary to his goals, because he needed to keep as many people alive as possible. His internal clock told him that it was already night, so it would be better to think about it at dawn. However, the night was just what he needed. He remembered one particular item that he had hidden earlier. It was the selfish rich man's food bag. He had completely forgotten about it, so he should rest a bit and regain his strength. After all, he will have a lot of work to do after the moon rises. However, when he entered the store, he found the shelves completely empty. I think someone took all the food out. Empty water bottles and packages of various snacks were scattered about. Unfortunately, what he had previously buried underground, someone had dug up and taken for themselves. Our hero thought that only a very brave person could do such a thing before moonrise, because now everyone will start fighting for resources. However, judging by his sarcastic smile, he was very happy about this circumstance and decided to take a look at these idiots. In a moment, we are transported to a sparsely populated, abandoned town. A group of young men had just removed a large number of boxes of food from an underpass at the subway station where the store was located. Across the street, 5 young men were watching them intently. The girl in the blue jacket was very indignant. She was in such a hurry when she saw all those groceries and tried to get some food, but those creepers took everything. Our beauty looked anxiously in the direction of this group of robbers. With fear in her voice, she said that their group was much stronger. But as soon as she said that, a guy with headphones interrupted her and said that there were too many of them. Even if they all had higher characteristics together, it was still very dangerous to approach this group of scumbags. Besides, the squad leader hadn't returned yet, so attacking without him was fraught with great difficulties. His words did not go unheeded by the 2 young men, who realized that they had never heard him say something like that before. Analyzing the situation, the girl couldn't understand how the thieves had found the shop so quickly. One of the members of this enemy unit turned around and looked in her direction. Then he smiled and waved his hand as if to greet our group. Such an action on his part greatly confused and frightened our entire group. They didn't understand what it could mean. But the young man, standing calmly against the wall, convinced everyone that it was just a provocation and they shouldn't pay any attention to it. He then suggested that they leave the place so as not to get into trouble. Since these people were able to take all the food, they should look for another store. However, he could hardly hide his excitement, and a cold sweat ran down his back. Obviously, he was involved. We go back to the events that took place a little earlier, when this young man suddenly appeared before a gang of would-be robbers. He told them that he knew where a large amount of food was and invited them to follow him to the subway. Also, they should hurry before the others took it all. He was willing to show them the way. According to the young man, our squad leader will have to fight these guys for food. There are too many of them. He can't do it alone, so he'll need his help. All the while, he's been hatching a cunning plan to overthrow the group leader. His words caused laughter from this gang of thugs. One of them thought that they must be trying to deceive them along with his friend. And in the next second, the young man decided to demonstrate the seriousness of his intentions and grabbed one of them by the jacket. The best decision for all of them was to listen to him, or they would be in trouble. He didn't listen to what the thug had to say. The next thing he knew, he struck him right on the nose with his fist. The blow was so hard that the thug was thrown violently to the side. Laughing, the young man told him that all 3 of them were below his level, so there was no need for him to set a trap for such low-level players. He's giving them a second chance to reconsider. We are transported back to the town, where our party has gathered in an abandoned cafe. To her surprise and delight, the girl notices the main character passing by on the street. She greeted him and motioned for him to come inside, saying that they were all gathered here. Of course, she was very happy to have her squad leader back, but the young man behind her did not share her feelings. He needn't have worried, though, because apparently no one had noticed that he was about to attack him when he was standing next to the train in the subway. If things came to light even now, he would just reply that he was wrong and that would be the end of it. The protagonist went into the store and told them that they had certain problems, but as soon as he finished, the girl interrupted him and said that all the products in the store were stolen. He asked the squad members how much food they had left, then noticed the small amount of food on the table. It was clearly not enough for such a large party. A few bottles of water, 2 candy bars, and some snacks. As if to reassure everyone, including our hero, the young man explained that now that the squad leader was back with them, they could take it all back. However, according to him, it will be a little difficult for our hero to deal with everyone alone, so he can help him a lot in this case. But our leader paid no attention to his words, and he had his own plan for the moment. He just wanted to have a snack. His words angered the young man, who thought it must be some kind of joke. He slammed his hand down on the table in front of our hero and declared that he was doing something wrong. Had the squad leader lost all fear? They risked their lives to get this food, and he just wants to take their food and eat it? Maybe he wants to give them something in return? And while the young man turned to the rest of the group and tried to win them over to his side, the protagonist sat back in his chair, looking idly at the food on the table in front of him and pondering. As if she was speaking on behalf of the entire group, the girl told him that everything here is shared and that he should not behave like this. However, the young man thought her words were complete nonsense. Why should they give him everything for nothing, without any reward? They risked their lives for this food, and they deserve it. According to him, this was true even for close friends, because our protagonist had not lifted a finger to get this food. And wasn't he the one who said that nothing was free here, and that everything had to be paid for? His verbal psychological manipulations seemed to have made an impression on the two young men. He looked at them with a smile and thought that this was his chance, because if he could get everyone on his side, he would have no problem getting rid of our squad leader. The young man clearly enjoyed acting out this game and playing his part, but our hero listened to all their conversations in silence, not saying a word. The next second, however, he turned sharply in their direction and said that this was not the way to do things. He agreed that he had nothing to give back to the troop for the food, so he offered to help them with something in return. As if expecting such a response from our hero, the young man explained that the squad leader probably had some artifacts with which he could pay for the food. But not everyone in the room understood what this was all about, or what our hero might have found. However, the young man explained to everyone that the squad leader had been to a secret location and had probably found a lot of interesting things. And now he had to share his findings with everyone. There was a climax to this theatrical performance, and the young man held out a small chocolate bar to our hero, expecting that if he continued with it, he would be able to show all of his findings. Showing absolutely no emotion, our protagonist watched him nonchalantly from his seat. Then he said with a smile that this young man was pretty good at grasping things on the fly. Once again, his opponent was not expecting this turn of events and told the protagonist that he needed to stop dawdling and answer the question. Suddenly, the squad leader stood up and walked towards the exit of the room. To the surprise of the young man standing there with a candy bar in his hand, he didn't understand what to do next. According to our hero, the young man's behavior was quite reasonable because he perceived others as his equals. Everyone looked at the protagonist in silence, and no one understood what he was doing. But he realized that he wasn't dragging them along because he needed them or their runes. On the contrary, he was the one they needed. And although the young man once again shouted at our protagonist, he thought to himself, remembering the words of the mage, that he had done everything he could at his request in such a situation. A wave of new flashbacks washed over his head, as if this young man reminded him of a villain he had once fought. But it seems that our hero was just pretending, and he breathed a sigh of relief because this scoundrel could not say such words. The protagonist stopped his internal analysis, then said goodbye to the group and started to leave. The first to speak was one of the girls in the group, who said with a smile that there was no need to bring things to a fight, because everything was very good and there was no need to escalate the situation. Turning to our beauty, she offered to take the protagonist back and follow him. The young man was a little nervous because he had failed to win over the members of the squad. But at the same time, he was glad that our hero was leaving this place because he would have a chance to unite the remaining guys around him. However, he is surprised to see that our beauty also leaves the place and follows the protagonist. She was able to catch up with him quickly and asked him with some trepidation in her voice if she could follow him. Her big, beautiful eyes shone in anticipation of a positive answer, but our hero declared without turning around that she could not go any further with him. However, as he said before, he couldn't forbid anything here. So the girl was very happy because it meant that she could go on with him. But in the next second, a young man sharply interrupted their conversation and said that the girl could not act like that and had to stay here. Now it was clear why the girl had hesitated before leaving, because according to this young man, he had given her some of his runes, which she now had to give back to him. Suddenly there was another voice behind him, a guy with headphones, who said that everything was fine and that he was also ready to go on with our hero. Smirking, the young man stopped him with his hand and said he didn't know what he was saying. He looked at him with his evil gaze and said it was a very wrong choice. After all, he had the nobility to pick this guy up like a stray dog, and now he just digs himself in and runs away. Has he forgotten who his master is? But the guy with the headphones took his hand off his shoulder and told him there was nothing he could do to him. They can't just get out of here, and no one knows where we are, so all his threats have no value or power. All his words are completely unimportant, so there is absolutely no reason for the young man in the headphones to run after him like a little dog. It seemed that most of the group was against this villain, so he had no choice but to give everyone who had just left the place a hard time. As he left, he shouted at them not to think that anywhere would be better than here. And when they become disillusioned with their leader, they will surely come crawling back to him. Meanwhile, in the deep twilight, the three of them confidently walked forward along the deserted street. With some excitement, the guy with the headphones said that maybe they should have brought some food with them, as their supplies wouldn't last long. But our hero seems to have spotted something very interesting in the shop window next door. He decided to change his torn sleeve jacket and update his wardrobe. After that, he declared that they would not need the food. His words caused a great surprise in the eyes of these guys. He had a new plan, and they needed to do something together. The guy in the headphones didn't understand at all what our protagonist was up to, because he could do almost anything. But if something happened to him, it would all be for nothing. The squad leader knew exactly what this young man was thinking. After all, it was easy to predict, since they knew nothing about the moon that was about to set. He turned around and announced with a smile that it was almost midnight. This news and his tone of voice caused a slight shock in the eyes of the young men. Is there something strange about the moon in this place? The girl said, as if waiting for the squad leader's answer. And in the next second, a large full moon appeared in the sky, which immediately turned into a giant eye, watching everything that was going on. This huge eye that suddenly appeared on the moon frightened the girl very much. And the guy with the headphones was shocked to see that all the food had disintegrated and turned into sand. As if she could not believe his words, the girl started to check her bag with trembling hands, and the next second she found that her supplies had turned into sand as well. But what a surprise it was when, in the next instant, they found a large number of glowing beings in front of them. All of these glowing silhouettes resembled people moving around different parts of this city, and all of them were clearly visible in the night. Were our heroes also glowing? They began to examine their bodies and then looked at each other. It seemed that those who were close were not emitting any light, but all those who were far away were glowing. A slight shock swept over the girl as she screamed in surprise that people could be seen even through the walls. They could see where they were, as if someone was forcing everyone to fight each other. The guy with the headphones looked at our hero and asked him if he knew about this. With a smile, the squad leader said that of course not, and even if he had superpowers, it did not mean that he knew absolutely everything. However, the guy and the girl could not understand why he was so relieved, and the next moment, the street was filled with loud shouts of people. Their words echoed from different parts of this city, and no one understood what was going on. Everyone was very surprised and outraged by what had happened, especially the food supply, and it was clear that people were starting to blame each other, and judging from some of the conversations, it was clear that some were starting to attack others, full of anger and resentment over the destroyed products. Paying no attention to this noise, our hero stood calmly on his seat and realized that this was an idiotic world. That was why he had earlier told the rest of the party not to take all the food, because with this moon, there was no more food. After his reflections, he walked deeper into the dark street to the surprise of a young man with headphones. Our hero replied that he had some business to take care of. We are transported to the very same cafe where three young men are horrified to discover that all their food has just disintegrated and turned to sand. The girl suggested that they look for other products immediately and not waste any time. One of the guys suggested that maybe those who got to the store first did something to the food. However, one of the anti-heroes of our story realized that the squad leader knew about it from the beginning. He was furious and understood that he had been tricked. The next second, the girl screamed loudly and saw a multitude of glowing creatures in the street. It was the same gang of thieves who had stolen all the food from the store earlier. They were looking for our anti-hero because they thought he had betrayed them. Now they want to meet him and get revenge on him. In this situation, the young man had no chance of winning because there were too many of them. The only option in this situation was to run away and wait for everyone to calm down. But his thoughts were abruptly interrupted by a girl who shouted loudly that it was enough just to stand still and that they needed to find a group leader who could help them. Her words provoked a fit of anger from the anti-hero, who told her that she didn't know what she was talking about. After all, in her opinion, they had to ask for help from someone who had betrayed them. Does she have no pride? She started to yell at him even harder because they didn't have the strength to deal with this crowd. They were not allowed to stay in this place. According to her, if this gang doesn't find them, they will come looking for our hero, and then they can warn him in advance. Standing next to this girl, her friend added that if there were many of them, the bandits would attack without thinking. Then they can explain to them that their food is gone as well. Her plan was apparently so ingenious that it caused them to burst out laughing. The young man realized that he had no choice but to make another temporary alliance. It was to his advantage. Even though he didn't like it, it was a good way to leave our hero in debt. Now all they had to do was sneak down the street without being found by this gang. But as soon as he spoke, some green slime bound his legs and he fell to the ground. He had no idea what it was, and there was no way he could get free of the green rope. The young man turned to what he thought were his friends and called out for help. Would they just look at him like an idiot and leave him alone? But suddenly the stern voice of a man from outside turned to them. What did they decide? If they picked him up, they would die, but they had a chance to escape. It was the boss, the leader of this gang. He seemed to be having a conversation just for this guy on the ground. The young men had nothing better to do than to leave the place quickly, and as they ran away, they could hear curses coming in their direction from the would-be victim lying on the ground. The man crouched down next to the young man and jokingly told him that he was too young to say such vile words. He then jokingly asked him what he thought of the green rope around his legs. The boss added that they were doing something all the time. Only there were a lot more of them, so the learning process was faster, though not as much fun. The man then stood up and said that the time for idle chatter was over. With an angry expression on his face, he looked at the young man on the floor and asked where the rest of the team was. And to demonstrate his strength to this young man, in the next second, with a strong kick of his foot, he broke a piece of asphalt right in front of this guy's feet. The young man was frightened by the joke and, lying on the ground, showed him his hands and said that he was ready to tell him everything and tell him where the rest of the squad had gone. The boss praised the young man for his intelligence, then added that he had some unresolved issues with other gang members. The very man our anti-hero had broken his nose with earlier stepped forward. He called him an old friend and inquired about his health. And now, in order to resolve their misunderstanding, he thinks that their faces should become similar. His words caused great inner tension in the young man. To himself, he regretted that these two had left him. However, he still thought that he could meet them later and take revenge. Unfortunately for him, in the next instant, the gang members smiled and started beating the young man heavily to the ground. As if oblivious to the multiple blows, he looked at the two men who had fled and vowed that he would find and kill them all. After a while, the young couple was surprised to find our heroes sitting on the ground, eating the delicious meal they had just prepared. They were like hikers on a camping trip who decided to take a short break after a hard trek in the mountains. The The smell was so delicious that these young men were drooling. Without hiding the disgust in her expression, the girl realized that our hero knew how to preserve one food and realized that the other food was bound to disappear. After this thought, she walked over to our hero as if nothing had happened and told him that she wanted to eat as well. But in the next second, our protagonist pulled out his spear with a sharp movement and swung it right in front of the girl's nose. The power of this weapon was so great that even the asphalt broke into several pieces after the swing. Unable to move, she was in deep shock and froze in her seat at what she had just seen. With a mouth full of flesh, our hero pointed his pike in her direction and told her not to cross that line. Then he turned and walked back to his seat. But the girl began to shout indignantly after him, for his behavior seemed outrageous to her. In her opinion, they weren't even fighting. Still, she was curious what would happen if she decided to cross the line. Our hero turned around and said with a snide smile that he didn't know for sure, but his superpower told him that it wouldn't lead to anything good. The young man was outraged by his words and couldn't believe he had such a power. Our hero, however, without turning in their direction, explained that his ability told him that it would soon be very unsafe here as well. And the next second, our leader was right, because the young men turned around and found a huge gang behind them, who were very happy to find our team. The group leader was especially excited about this encounter and looked at the protagonist closely. In order to obtain this special item, also known as the selfie rich man's food bag, you must fulfill a few conditions. And that condition is very simple. We need to cook and eat as much food as possible while the moon is in the sky. At first glance, the task is not difficult, but there is one more condition. You have to be really selfish, because only the person who cooks and eats the most food will get the reward. Without sharing it with anyone, you have to greedily devour the food while others are trying to take it away from you. As our hero stabbed another piece of meat into his knife, he thought that whoever came up with this task clearly had a bad taste. A young couple who had just come to see our heroes noticed that even in this situation, the young man was completely calm. But then someone else, whom they didn't expect to see at all, suddenly appeared. This was one of the anti-heroes of our story, a badly beaten young man. He started screaming at these young men with all his might. He swore at them and couldn't believe that they had abandoned him. But they, as if making excuses, felt guilty and said they ran away because they were looking for help. However, the young man began to shout even louder and drool flew out of his mouth as he cursed at them and told them they were talking utter nonsense. If they hadn't run away, the gang wouldn't have beaten him up. At that moment, the gang leader came over and put his hand on his shoulder to calm him down. You should have calmed down a bit, because you shouldn't say things like that about your new friends. The man then turned to our party and said that he was very happy to meet them again. It seems our hero was very capable. He was interested in where they got the meat, and if they had told him. But at that moment, our hero interrupted him and said that meat is everywhere. Why is he asking him? Continuing to chew piece by piece, the protagonist replied. With great surprise, the whole gang and the boss looked at the young man who was chewing this meat with great gusto. How could he eat it? The gang leader couldn't understand how his members could eat this poisonous food so calmly. After all, he had fed a similar dish to his participants earlier, and then they all suffered from dehydration. The man approached the protagonist again, noting that he knew about the food he was cooking. But the protagonist interrupted him again and said that if you cook the meat in goblin blood, it becomes edible and no longer poisonous. The gang leader had no answer and paused for a long moment. He remembered the words of the young man who had told him earlier that our hero had a special superpower, and that he had used it to get out of the station with a very valuable item. However, today is the perfect time for a battle to take away all of our hero's items. As he continued to analyze his thoughts, the gang leader realized that there were many more, and he was just a 20-year-old guy. He might be used to fighting monsters, but humans were another matter. A smile appeared on his face, and he turned to the badly beaten young man. He was well aware that it was extremely dangerous to approach such an experienced warrior alone, so he sent him to scout him out so that he could be the first to go to his former friends and taste a delicious meal from them. Even though the young man was reluctant to do so, as he felt that he was being ordered around, one would have to be a complete idiot to cross such a strong crowd of criminals in such a situation. The next thing the girl knew, the protagonist rose from his seat. Limping heavily, the young man walked in her direction and declared that they needed to talk. In the next moment, the girl screamed and tried to stop him from crossing the line on the sidewalk. But he didn't listen to her and started accelerating even faster in her direction, telling her to shut up. However, our protagonist said that he was tired of this show and had had enough. And in the next second, this young man felt the quick and strong blow of our warrior's spear. At first, he didn't realize what had happened, and a moment later he was lying on the ground. He turned around and looked at his leg, which was lying on the side. He grabbed the injured area with both hands and began to scream loudly in pain. This sudden turn of events shocked the gang leader and all the other gang members. Lying on the ground, the young man cursed everyone around him, calling our hero bad names and blaming him for everything that had happened. Could he really do this to him over a miserable piece of meat? It seemed to make perfect sense to even our pretty girl and the guy with the headphones that this could happen. After that, the young man picked himself up and turned to his gang, telling them not to think of giving up for nothing, because they had to finish this upstart right now. In his opinion, when he gets stronger, he won't leave them alone. He shouted loudly that the main character would come after them and kill everyone for the gems. He shouted at them in anger that they were standing there like idiots. They needed to attack immediately. His words had an effect on the gang leader, who ordered his subordinates to prepare for battle. Although they were all a little afraid, they knew that if they couldn't deal with him now, he could easily deal with all of them in the future. Especially since they had a lot of weapons and it was a big full moon, he wouldn't be able to get far away from them, so it was worth eliminating him now. Completely unperturbed, our hero stood calmly on his seat and looked at them with his adult, serious gaze. Is this really the look of a young man? What hell must he have gone through to be so strict? They thought. An intense tension hung in the air, and there was a long pause. Our hero stood and looked at this crowd of armed bandits, remembering the advice of his friends from the future. They often disagreed, even after they all started working together. The girl believed that it was not worth making enemies, while the mage said that if someone evil appeared in front of him, it was imperative to crush him, otherwise he would return and take revenge. Well, it seems that our protagonist agreed with them, and that's why he won't give his enemies a chance. In the next second, he activated the runes hidden in his hand. This behavior of the protagonist greatly angered all those thugs, who in the next second, with a wild scream and fury, rushed at him with their knives to destroy our warrior. This night, however, he had a different plan. He quickly rushed to the attack and began to deliver powerful blows with his rapier. With the help of this crowd, he will surely accomplish his mission. Our hero moved so quickly that the members of this gang had no time to react. One by one, our warrior quickly delivered his powerful blows, crushing everyone around him. His blows were so powerful that no matter how hard they tried to resist, they were thrown high into the air. This terrified the rest of the gang, who immediately rushed to flee, much to the dismay of the ringleader, who stood in the middle and didn't know what to do. He didn't seem to believe in the success of this battle anymore, but he still shouted for them not to run, because there were more of them. Now is the time to use them. But as soon as he finished, the next second, our main hero was standing in front of him, looking carefully in his direction. He kept waving his knife in front of the main warrior, saying that unlike the others, he wouldn't run away from this place. But as if not listening to his monologue, the young man came closer and closer to him. With horror in his eyes, the man tried to put psychological pressure on the protagonist, saying that killing a human being is not the same as killing a monster, so he wouldn't succeed because it was a real murder. A young man like our protagonist can never live with that. In the next second, he became silent when our hero came too close to him and pointed his spike in his direction. However, in the next moment, our hero threw the man aside with a sharp blow from his rapier, leaving multiple wounds on his body. With the confident posture of a victor, the protagonist stood beside the defeated man for some time. It seems that our main character has become what he always was, a ruthless but fair warrior. Although they had very serious wounds, many of these men were still alive. But that fact in no way diminished the psychological impact on these two young people. Holding his weapon over one of the enemies, our hero asked them why they stayed. Presumably to fight him, he grinned and looked in their direction. The young men looked at each other and in the next instant began to run quickly from the place. Meanwhile, our hero, still swinging his rapier, approached the guy with the headphones and the young beauty. Suddenly, with intense greed, he began to devour one piece of meat after another. It seemed to him that these two were eager to share a meal with him as well. However, the young man and the girl had something else on their minds in such a situation, given our hero's behavior. They watched him eat in silence for a while, surrounded by a large number of defeated enemies. This went on until morning. Dawn came, and the bright morning sun began to rise on the horizon. And in the next second, the giant eye of the great full moon began to close. These two newcomers followed right behind our hero, who was very nauseous because he had just eaten his 3-day ration. In the end, he never completed a single task while in the company of humans. However, he was very happy to have this special bag in his hands. It protected the food from the moonlight and kept it fresh in a place where anything was possible. With 5 times the volume, it held nearly 2 weeks' worth of food. For the first time in many hours, the silence was broken by a girl who asked our hero if he was all right. She still couldn't understand why he had inflicted such serious but not fatal wounds on those thugs. The protagonist paused for a moment before looking in her direction with a slight smile and saying that she was a very devious woman. Of course, he was joking, but the girl took his words seriously and became indignant because she was just worried about him. According to her, those enemies could easily recover, and after that, they would have a chance to defeat him again. However, that's unlikely because he would be much stronger by then. After this brief conversation, they followed our hero again in silence. Of course, now is not the time to worry about others, but it seems that one could become stronger just by killing everyone around him for their gems. Our hero realized that this girl had already perfectly adapted to this place. In a normal situation, that might be the way to go. But our leader was not trying to become stronger. That wasn't his main purpose for returning from the future. Saving as many people as possible, that's what was really important to him. We needed to come together, settle our differences, and most importantly, set the rules. And the first of those rules was that you can't kill people for their runes. Yes, killing someone will give you some runes and make you stronger. But it's no substitute for what that person could do in real life with their skills and abilities. No one will obey the rules at first, but when someone strong is in charge, everyone will obey. That's why you can't let anyone see him kill people. Sure, sometimes cleaning is necessary, but not now. There are too many eyes watching him right now. Our protagonist's thoughts were interrupted by a guy with headphones who said he was leaving. His words caught the girl by surprise. He lowered his eyes to the ground and said in a quiet voice that he couldn't keep up with them, so he was leaving. The girl barely had time to say that they were one big team before our hero interrupted and said that he respected other people's decisions. So the young man can do whatever he wants. After that, the guy with the headphones abruptly turned around and started running away in the opposite direction. Smiling again, our hero turned to the girl and asked her if she wanted to leave his company as well. He looked at her with his stern, true warrior look and asked her if she was afraid of him. It seemed to be the first time the girl noticed such a strong look, and a cold sweat ran down her back. Of course she was afraid, but she had no choice. It was necessary not to cross a certain line, and to remain friendly with him without revealing all her feelings. After some thought, she told him that if she left now, he would never take her back, so she would go on with him as far as she could. They stood in silence for a while, looking each other straight in the eye. After an awkward pause, our hero turned and walked the other way with a smile, noting to himself that the girl had good intuition. In that case, he motioned for her to follow him, and within moments they were descending into a new dungeon. It was just another subway station. We are transported back to the place where a bloody battle took place not long ago. A badly scarred but still alive young man had just emerged from under the pile of corpses lying on the ground. He cursed loudly and said that his old friends were good for nothing. He had to search everyone and take anything of value. In his opinion, our protagonist was wrong, because small wounds heal. And when he came to his senses, he killed them all, especially the main character. He tried very hard, but still crawled slowly in some obscure direction. However, in the next second, a familiar silhouette suddenly appeared in front of his eyes. It was the same man with the headphones, looking at him with his usual calm gaze. Lying on the ground, the young man began to curse at the guy as well. In the next second, however, he thought that maybe this was a chance, and he asked him to help him up. His words took the guy by surprise. But the young man on the ground tried his manipulation again, saying they should join forces. It was a chance to become stronger. After his words, the boy's eyes filled with intense anger. The young man on the ground looked at the boss who was still alive and said that he had threatened them. That's why it happened the way it did. That's why the guy with the headphones has to get rid of him first. But this guy seemed to pay absolutely no attention to his words. He reached his hand to the ground to pick up the knife that was lying there. He began to move closer and closer to his potential victim as he turned away, wondering if he would succeed in his next evil plan. However, in the next second, the young man on the ground realized that there was a completely different man standing in front of him than the one he was used to seeing before. This young man, with his sudden movement, grabbed his regular perpetrator by his clothes. With a completely different voice, strong and powerful, he told him that he now realized that when fate gives you a chance, you should not miss it. He moved as close as he could, his eyes full of rage and fury. And the next second, the guy with the headphones did what he'd been dreaming of for so long. His opponent's grip loosened, and he greedily gulped air, gasping for his last breath. How dare that guy do this to him? Still cursing, he didn't realize that his end was near. Now our new hero dropped his headphones to the ground, and this signified a transcendent change in his consciousness. He explained to his enemy that he had once told him how worthless he was. Now it looks like they've switched places. Confidently, he looked his attacker straight in the eye and was very curious to know if he had really enjoyed bullying him all this time in the guise of his overbearing father. With that, he released his grip and our anti-hero fell to the ground with a thunderous crash. For the first time in a long time, the young man smiled and began to chuckle slightly. He released the hand that held the knife. The blade fell to the ground with a clatter. In the same second, he had a sharp realization of what he had just done. He immediately shouted to himself to pull himself together and not be a wimp. At the same moment, a precious rune appeared in front of him as a reward. But the matter wasn't over yet, and he grabbed the knife again. After that, he slowly approached the still-alive gang leader. The man was visibly frightened and suggested that the young man not touch him, but let him live because they could work together. It seems that our new hero now understood why the protagonist had given up on him. All this time, he thought he looked too pathetic in his eyes. He was so useless that he couldn't even fight alongside him against the monsters they encountered. And if he had not been afraid, but had grown stronger like our protagonist, things would have been different. Maybe that would be the case. But he's not what he used to be. He was always afraid of what others would think of him. But now he's changed, and he's going to prove it to the rest of us. Now he will become strong, just like our protagonist. The young man decided that he would now use all these people to catch up with our hero in skill. And soon he would look at him in a completely different way. It was still turbulent in this abandoned city. A small flock of raven monsters tried to attack our girl. She quickly recognized the approaching danger and used the skills she had learned to fight those birds. She took a deep breath and shouted with great force, giving the monsters a sonic blow. Her new technique came in handy because most of those birds had fallen to the ground. However, one of those flying monsters tried to sneak up and attack her from the side. However, in the next second, our hero destroyed this beast with a swift stroke of his rapier. Looks like he just saved this girl again. As he looked around at the birds lying on the ground, our hero told her that there is a difference between always relying on others and doing your best and accidentally making a mistake. So it's natural for her to rely on her teammates to fill in the gaps in certain skills. According to our hero, she needs to make sure she fully understands her strengths and weaknesses. The girl listened to him carefully and was very happy to get her share of gems after another battle with monsters. It had been 2 days since our heroes had last fought in this area. In fact, they had been here for 3 whole days. After these thoughts, the girl decided to check her vitals and activated the screen. She was glad that she had once bought a certain skill from our hero that increased the mana and health recovery rate. It would be very difficult for her without it. She still tries not to rely on his help, but she realizes that without him, without his support, she would have a very hard time. Meanwhile, Our hero also activated the screen to check his stats. Dexterity and perception were just above 42. He was pleased to see that the balance between the traits was right. Luckily, he had this girl by his side, who only increased his strength and stamina. And our hero traded his runes for her dexterity and perception runes. Suddenly, through a special public address system, someone's loud voice echoed throughout the city. This voice announced to all present that they should gather at the starting point, and that those who were late would be punished. This announcement made the girl a little nervous, while the expression on our hero's face made it clear what was coming next. It was obvious that it was the voice of the very same flying devil. Our hero suggested to her to return to the starting point. And while our heroes went to the designated meeting place, the girl did not dare to ask our protagonist a question of interest to her. From her nonverbal behavior, our hero knew that she was very shy to ask him her question. She blushed with embarrassment, but still dared to ask him her question. She wanted to know if our hero had a girlfriend. Of course, it was a very personal question, but the man next to her was much better than she had thought of him before. So the girl couldn't resist asking him about it. Out of sheer excitement, she kept rubbing her nails. She seemed to have one more question. It was then that our hero remembered a member of his squad who was very fond of such questions. Now it made sense why she had been so shaky lately and couldn't talk. It was clear that she liked our hero too much. However, because of her intense excitement, she didn't ask the next question about their possible relationship. And at that time, our hero remembered about his girlfriend he had in that future that will never be again. Unfortunately, he hasn't met her yet, so he can't lose her again. After such a long pause, he answered the beauty next to him that he couldn't remember if he had a girlfriend. They walked the rest of the way in silence, without saying a word. When they arrived, they saw a large number of other players, some of them injured. Some of them were well known. Their faces were recognizable. However, no one understood why they had come here, and the atmosphere was rather strange. Finally, the little devil appeared and greeted everyone cheerfully. Much to this flying creature's dismay, none of the players were late, so there is no one to punish. The flying fairy told everyone that she had two pieces of good news for them. The first news was that if the players stayed in the area for 72 hours, they would be allowed to leave. Like a little child, this devil was so happy for our players that she offered to applaud with them. For a while, the players present didn't react, but the little monster with the demonic voice suggested that they show some emotion, and the next second, everyone applauded loudly. They were very happy. But now, according to the little devil, it was time to announce the most important thing of all. And as soon as our players turned to look in the direction indicated, they were overcome with intense terror and shock. A huge, never-before-seen object appeared in front of them, and no one knew what it was. It was a large magic altar standing in the middle of the square where everyone had gathered. Even our girl's eyes widened in surprise, as she had never seen anything like it before. Our hero, however, remained calm in his place, as he already knew everything. But inside this magical altar lived a huge, terrifying monster. However, according to the flying fairy, it was a very cute creature. And the size of this beast was so big that when it opened its eye, everyone was afraid of its majesty. The little fairy called it a flesh-eating beast. For the sake of all those present who were terribly frightened and shocked, this beast had been starving all day, and it was very eager to get out of this magic altar. According to the flying devil, although this altar was very beautiful, its durability was lacking, so it would probably fall apart soon. And when the walls of this tower finally collapse, the terrifying monster will break out, and many of these warriors will not survive the encounter with him. The monster's loud growl echoed off the walls of the altar, and everyone present froze in anticipation of something ominous. With her usual demonic smile, the little fairy announced that there was a second piece of good news. Luckily for our players, this monster could still be put to sleep. When it falls asleep, it won't try to destroy the altar to get out. But all the players in the square were so shocked by what they saw that no one could guess how this could be done. Therefore, the little fairy's blessing was of no interest to them. But according to the flying fairy, it was very simple. All you had to do was feed the monster 5 people a day. These words further shocked everyone present except our hero. There are a total of 60 players left. It seems that this monster needs to be fed 3 times, so they'll have to feed almost a quarter of the entire group to put it to sleep. But to make our heroes think faster, the little devil decided to show them a video from another learning zone. In this video, the same huge, scary monster was mercilessly attacking many people, devouring them with its hungry teeth. And for all the people in the area, there was no escape from this beast. It seemed gigantic in comparison. As if nothing had happened, the little fairy explained that all these people had decided to join forces to fight this monster in another training area. However, the crowd immediately began to discuss vehemently that it was impossible to fight this monster, and the only way out was to sacrifice oneself to someone present. But it seems that there is one brave man who decided to ask a very important question. This young man was interested in the principle by which people were chosen to be eaten by the monster. But the little fairy told him not to ask her how it was done. They can choose who they want to give away. It could be someone weak, or they could choose at random. But the main condition was that the food had to be alive. And to speed up their decision, the little devil told everyone present that they had only 1 hour to make a decision. And after 24 hours had passed, they would have about an hour to feed the monster again and put it to sleep. Unfortunately, the timer had already started counting down, and they had less and less time left. No one could hold back their emotions anymore, and they started screaming that this demonic thing was ruining everything, and it seemed like they were all going to die. However, our girl was very calm and turned to the hero for advice. She wanted to ask him what he thought of the situation, but he only replied briefly that the outcome of this whole event was a foregone conclusion anyway. His words surprised her. She didn't know what they meant. The same young man who had asked the flying fairy his question shouted out the word justice. He suggested that they could find out everything by drawing lots. They would have to pick 5 people today, tomorrow, and the next day. But in the next second, someone very familiar to us from earlier asked this guy with a sneering grin why on earth they should do that. All the players looked in his direction, including 2 of our heroes. And the girl was very surprised at who she saw in front of her eyes. The same guy who had been walking around with headphones on earlier looked at the entire crowd and asked them what this justice was all about. But this young man did not come alone. He was accompanied by his new group. Everyone was curious to know what kind of justice he was talking about. Looking into the face of the man on the other side of the crowd, the young man asked him, as if addressing everyone in the square, why they had to be fair at all. Shocked, the man in the red cap replied that he didn't know what he was talking about because, in his opinion, there were simply no other options. At this point, the young man said that there was such an option and walked toward the lamppost. And in the next second, with a slight movement of his hand, he broke the huge metal structure. The man and all the others behind him were seized with intense terror. A huge piece of steel from the lamppost hit the ground with a resounding thud. The young man, throwing pieces of stone from his hand, looked at the crowd and suggested that 5 of the most useless people be sent to the monster to be eaten. For a moment there was a lull and a pause, and no one could say a word. The young man clearly enjoyed this feeling of superiority over the others. Even our hero noticed this. All eyes were now on him, for he felt that he possessed strength and power. After that, he told them that this was no time to relax, and all those who had decided to fight this monster earlier had already died, and only the unknown was waiting for them next. And it's also very clear, and everyone should realize it, that it's only going to get harder from now on. Who knows? Maybe tomorrow they'll meet a new creature here that will be stronger than this one. Therefore, they had to use all their strength to fight this monster. The young man looked at the man in the red cap and said, "A weakling like him cannot contribute to the common cause. Therefore, it would be wise to get rid of the weakest first." The young man then turned to our hero and asked him what he thought. They stood there for a while, looking at each other in silence, and with all his expressions, the young man showed him that he had changed and was no longer the same. As if reading his thoughts, our protagonist understood that his interlocutor did not want to become his enemy and wanted to help him. After all, he could live a completely different life in this place, but he needed help. The help of our chief warrior. According to this young man, his proposal was perfect, so he expected the protagonist to make the right decision. After all, his opponent said that it was a very good idea. However, he has another suggestion, and if everyone agrees, they can survive and won't even have to fight this thing. His words took the young man and everyone else in the room by surprise. A buzz went through the crowd, and they began to discuss what he had just said. Is there really another way? What could he be talking about? These were the questions the young man asked himself. The man in the red cap was terrified, so he shouted loudly that even if they joined forces, they wouldn't be able to defeat this thing. The video they watched clearly shows that they have no chance, because it is impossible to defeat a monster that regenerates its strength by eating people. However, our hero looked at him with his calm gaze and wondered why he thought they had to fight. The man in the red cap was very surprised to hear such a word. Does he really mean that he's going to fight this monster alone? In the next second, our hero surprised everyone and replied with a smile that this was exactly what he intended to do. The crowd began to discuss his words wildly again, and no one believed that he could fight this monster alone. It was impossible. One of the men turned to our hero and said that this was no ordinary goblin. If he did not kill this monster within 1 hour, they would all die. Meanwhile, the timer continued to tick relentlessly, getting smaller by the second, so they had less than an hour left. Although the young man did not say a word, he still had his head down out of old habit. He squinted at our hero, wondering if our chief warrior had enough strength to handle this thing by himself. However, our protagonist confidently folded his arms on his chest, turned around, and explained to everyone present that although he said he would fight this monster alone, it would be a bit difficult right now. The young man was immediately pleased. Doesn't he mean he needs help? Maybe they could join forces and fight this thing together. But our hero immediately calmed him down, saying that he must not have been listening to him, because he's the only one who will personally fight the monster. The young man had no way of knowing what his friend was about to say. Before answering, our hero paused. By this time, the girl understood perfectly that he would not take her with him because she would be a burden. After a while, he began to speak and everyone listened attentively. In his opinion, if his strength and stamina increased by another 30 points, he would be able to fight this monster alone. And he had a special offer for everyone present. He was willing to destroy this thing if they increased his stats. Everyone started to discuss his words again. No one knew who would give him their runes. Perhaps someone should be sacrificed, since there were quite a few runes. He needed 60 runes to gain 100 strength and stamina, and 50 dexterity and perception. If our hero is going to use Madman Sweets, these stats should be enough. With his extensive combat experience, he knows exactly what it takes to win. He desperately needed a second hidden object. Everyone he knew in his squad so far couldn't get their hands on this prize. But there was only one person who could do it. He had very good skills and high stats, but even he got this item after winning with his last breath. Therefore, our hero had to become stronger as soon as possible to get this hidden item. He told everyone present that he didn't care who gave up their runes. When he collected the required amount, he would go straight to the magic altar. Meanwhile, the timer showed 41 minutes. It had to be considered that the longer they waited, the worse it was for everyone. The man said irritably that weak players like him didn't have that many runes. And if they did, they would be much stronger than they are now. He started yelling at the other players, saying that they should give 1 or 2 runes each, or maybe they should draw lots. But his words didn't please one of the girls present, who approached him. She was a very strong and brave warrior, judging by her appearance alone. The girl told him that she should not give up her runes to save his worthless soul. After all, in her opinion, he was the most useless one here. Even if he loses a few runes, it won't change anything for him. It's possible that he never even got a single rune, so it's a wasted opportunity for him to say that. She began to insult and humiliate him because he is very weak, so he always hides behind the backs of the strong. Her words sent the man into a rage, and he couldn't stand her insults any longer. But as soon as he said something back, she told him to shut up and showed him her sharp blade. The man began to step aside and loudly told her that her power was all she had, and that she didn't even understand what it meant to respect her elders. In the hurry of his speech, the man mentioned that they all grew up in a democratic environment. Seizing the opportunity, the girl latched onto his words and offered to vote. And according to her, the vote will be a secret ballot. It is brought up for discussion that one side was in favor of saving his kind, and the other side was in favor of killing the weak. So they had to make a democratic decision and choose the only option. As if looking for help, the man turned to our protagonist and asked him if he could take the runes he needed from others himself. But in the next second, he received a hard fist on his cheek from a man in a red cap who shouted at him that he had to live because he had a wife and children. And why is he trying to turn the situation around when he was originally talking about something completely different? Meanwhile, our hero looked at his watch again and realized that now they were all making mistakes and probably all of them would die soon because there was less and less time left. People began to fight, and everyone argued with each other. They didn't seem to know how to make concessions yet. Our hero knew how this was going to end. We had to clean up the mess. So he called out to everyone again, looking in their direction. They should have listened to him because he was offering them a new solution. He pointed to the people he thought were the weakest. They were 15 persons. Does he really want to sacrifice them all? A slight fear gripped them. But our hero looked in their direction with a smile and said that he had a completely different opinion. Meanwhile, the clock on the timer showed less than 30 minutes until the monster would appear. Standing in front of the open doors of the magic altar, our young beauty was very worried about the fate of the protagonist. A young man, whom we already knew, approached her and asked her why she did not go inside with him, since she wanted to. She looked in the direction of her friend and replied with an embarrassed smile that in this case there was no need to explain because it was already clear. Sure, she'd love to go with him to fight this monster, but it looks like she just can't keep up with our hero. Being a typical introvert, the young man thought that our hero had rejected this girl as well. So what's she going to do next? She's not just going to stand here and wait for him, is she? The girl answered very clearly that she had a definite plan and was going to do something that would definitely make our hero angry. Meanwhile, our protagonist stood in front of a select group of weak players. He informed them that they were no different from anyone else. But for some reason, they didn't work when others tried hard to improve their characteristics. He didn't care what they were doing at that moment. It was their choice. They were chosen because they were useless and couldn't do anything to help others. They came to this place, but for some reason they thought that others would do their best for them, that someone else would take care of them. If they wanted to live, each of these 15 people chosen by our hero had to borrow 2 runes from the others. That was his proposal. They would then have another 72 hours to hunt and get those runes back. If any of them ran away without repaying their debt, they had to tell him. He will make up for it. Our hero held out his hand and declared with a smile that he did not believe anyone would have the courage to run away under such circumstances. Belle stood up for the protagonist and said that he was a man of his word, so he knew exactly how to take care of everyone and could be trusted. However, she had to hurry because she was in a rush to improve her characteristics to keep up with our hero. At that time, the young man suggested that she join his team. According to him, the rest of us would be lucky to have her. But the girl, turning to him, declared with a smile that she had definite plans of her own. So she couldn't give him a definite answer right now. He fell silent again, thinking that just looking at her made him realize how much stronger she was than before. His hands trembled, and he clenched them into fists. He had to get stronger as well. After all, he was not yet capable enough to prove his worth to our hero. At that moment, the very strong girl called him out and told him that she wanted to have a certain conversation with him. The whole crowd was looking in his direction, and he did not understand what they wanted to talk to him about. One of the men approached this young woman, put his hand on her shoulder, and told her not to be so nervous when she tried to talk to this young man. With a smile, he explained that his friend was being a bit brief because she was very shy. He then introduced himself and said his name. Pointing to our young man's group, he asked if he was really their leader. Then he added that they had some things to discuss because he had a suggestion. Of course, it was some kind of trap. It was as if the young man didn't believe he was really a leader until that moment. Of course, they were all his friends. They listened to him. And that seemed to be what it meant to be a true leader. He was very flattered by such words, and so this man came to an understanding with him very quickly. They shook hands, and the man even asked if our protagonist was his friend as well. But for some reason, the man in the tie was very interested in talking about the squad leader, so his words caused the young man some surprise. Meanwhile, in the magic altar, our hero had passed through a special magic door and was sitting on the very last highest floor of this huge structure. He prepared for battle, pulling every item he had from his backpack. Goblin poison wouldn't work on this monster, so it was best to use the special paralyzing poison he was treating his rapier with. He also had flying cat marble pearls. Once absorbed, they would restore a small amount of health for a certain amount of time. It was actually quite good, considering that he got them on a hunting trip earlier. The young man swallowed it right away. We should have used this item before. Of course, the balance of the characteristics would be disturbed, but there was nothing he could do in such a situation. To fight this thing, you had to use everything you had. It was indeed a very scary, strong, and ferocious beast. Our hero thought that now was the perfect time to use the madman's sweetness. He took this beautiful package out of his pocket and lit a spellbinding cigarette. Streams of magical smoke engulfed his entire body, inside and out, and he felt a sensation he hadn't experienced in a long, long time. With each new inhalation, he felt his strength and abilities increase, and in the next instant, he reached the peak of his form, as the runes had finally raised his level. When a rune's value exceeds 100, it changes color. Colorless becomes red, red becomes orange, and orange becomes yellow. He activated his screen to check his current stats. They were very high. Starting with colorless runes, the units of measurement of runes change. The numerical difference between a normal rune and a colorless rune was small, but the difference in their usefulness was simply huge. This monster was too strong for the first training area, so colorless runes would be useful in this situation. In his hearing, he said that he would have torn that monster apart if it had something like the essence of a troll, a special item from the secret area. But considering what he has, one thing is for sure, only one person is capable of obtaining such an item. With that, he jumped from the tower onto the monster's back. The battle has begun. The first thing our hero realizes upon entering this world is that the greater the challenge, the greater the reward. And in the next second, this huge beast noticed our hero, who flew towards it with his sword at great speed. The battle began, and at that time, the people the young man had interacted with earlier entered the altar through that magical door. They tried to keep quiet so as not to attract unnecessary attention. The young man didn't understand why they were here or why they were communicating in a half-whisper. He went inside very slowly. The cunning man assured him that he should have brought his former friends. But the young man suggested that we all come together to help our hero fight the monster. Each monster had certain abilities at birth. This flesh-eating monster only had 2 definite strong skills. At that moment, this fierce bull-headed beast struck with great force, and our hero barely had time to escape. And the first skill of that beast was the horror skill. This means that it could have a special magical effect on humans, but apparently not on our hero, who was preparing for his next blow thanks to the rapier. The huge paw with the sharp, long claws flew at him again. He jumped aside with ease, and his movements were so fast that he could jump while dodging powerful blows. This fierce skill could paralyze prey, and then this beast would devour it to recover. This monster was not so easy, and even our hero had to sweat a lot to fight it. He remarked to himself that he was very glad that this beast's skill had not reached a high level. After all, if he could use devouring others for his own recovery, combined with sucking the life force out of everything around him, he would be really hard to defeat. Once again, he unleashed his countless powerful fiery blows, shattering the stone beneath our hero's feet. But thanks to his enhanced qualities and the sweetness of a madman, the protagonist was able to dodge these blows in time. He was only able to inflict small stabs with his needle, but he knew how to use it most effectively. The protagonist prepared for another attack. It was as if he could see the many nerves running all over his body under the skin of this huge wild beast. He knew how to hit him in a way that would restrict his movements and paralyze him for a while. Our brave warrior could easily pierce its skin and target the median nerve to inject his pre-prepared poison into it. With great speed, our hero moved through the room and struck the monster several times with his rapier. Besides, this monster had a second median nerve between its joints. So in the next second, our hero delivered a precise blow to that spot, causing the monster to scream in pain. It seemed that our warrior could take his time now, as the monster could no longer move. Meanwhile, the timer showed 12 minutes and 1 second before the altar would finally collapse. But this battle would never end. Our hero threw his many blows and managed to dodge the monster's powerful attacks. The young man slid his feet along the stone floor and stopped to assess the situation. The beast's fierce breath heated the air, and its red, bright eyes glowed with intense anger. This monster was trying to make a psychological attack on our hero. Although this horror skill was quite unique, it didn't affect his mind because our hero had a special magic resistance. Of course, compared to all the creatures our hero had fought in the past, this was child's play, and he's confident that he can win. Our hero had an ability that had been developed over the past years of fighting and absorbing the knowledge needed to survive. Once again, he had just dodged another powerful paw strike from this monster. Our hero had battlefield foresight. Now he understands what it means, because he used to laugh at the term. He really sees what this beast is going to do, where it's going to move, and how it's going to attack our hero. However, the monster's blows passed over our hero's body. If he hadn't increased his strength and stamina, he wouldn't have been able to attack and dodge those blows so easily. But it seems that the place chosen for the battle was very good. He didn't enter the altar for nothing. At that very moment, a group that had entered the place earlier was looking at him from the side. Standing on it, they noticed that it looked completely different up close. The girl said in disgust, "Did he really think he could defeat this monster by himself?" But the young man next to him laughed hard at her words, and he was sure that this young man knew what he was doing, which was why he had come here alone. He certainly looks very relaxed. He is also smoking a cigarette. Behind their backs was our now familiar character, who could hear their conversations. They felt that our hero was trying to deceive them, because judging by his actions, he didn't need the extra runes. Now they wanted to do what they had come here to do, go down quietly and carry out their devious plan. But in the next second, our young man shouted loudly that they had come to help our group leader. His words startled our warrior, and his cigarette fell out of his mouth. But the young man continued to shout, saying that they would soon come down and help him. Everyone else urged him to be quiet. Doesn't he realize that he has to be quiet here, or else he'll draw extra attention to himself and the monster will hear them? The young man pretended not to understand what the man was saying. Somehow, he didn't immediately realize that he really needed to be quiet in a place like this. However, the man in the tie thought to himself that a very strange idiot had come with them. Nevertheless, the young man was very happy to be noticed by our hero, and they both smiled as they looked at each other. The once smiling man in the tie was very displeased because he felt that the young man had foiled his cunning plan. However, in his opinion, there was still no need to panic, because as long as our hero continued to fight the giant creature down below, he simply wouldn't have time to keep an eye on them. And as soon as he loses his guard, they will attack two at once, killing two birds with one stone. In this man's opinion, our hero was very dangerous, and he was able to confirm this once again after seeing him fight the monster. He thought that he was different from everyone else. This is not a man, but a stealthy and well-fed tiger. A monster that doesn't attack just because it doesn't feel hungry yet. And it's not just his strength. This man will never forget the moment that happened to them all that first night. Not only did that guy decide to face such a crowd alone, he also attacked without any hesitation, as if he was enjoying what he was doing. Therefore, there was no way that such a dangerous person could be allowed to make his own rules. If it was possible to destroy him, it had to be done at any moment. In his opinion, he could straighten him out and then straighten everyone else out, while keeping our beautiful girl for himself. After much deliberation, he suggested that this cunning little band of traitors go down and carry out his plan. After all, if they left now, it would be just in time. The beast had already slowed down considerably and was not paying any attention to them. However, our young man had his own special plan, and in the next instant, the girl looked cautiously in his direction, for she noticed that he was somehow very quiet. But as soon as she raised her head, the next second, the stairs began to collapse. And none of them understood why it happened, for nothing had foretold such a disaster. A moment later, all these men fell down the stairs to the very bottom, the place where our hero was fighting. When they got up to look around, they found that the stairs had already been destroyed. Now they can't go up. Much to their dismay, this huge wild animal spotted everyone. The monster felt that there was a new victim for him here. And this monster began to look at them with his magical gaze, which brought terror and fear to the minds of the people. They realized that he seemed much more dangerous now than when they were up there. For a while, the monster just stared at them without doing anything, as if he was studying whom to choose as his victim. But the company noticed that our young man was not there, and that he had gone somewhere. However, they noticed our hero upstairs, who continued to climb the stairs as if nothing had happened, getting further and further away from them. The girl called for him to come down. The man with the tie knew that their business was bad, and at the last moment he tried to interest the hero to go downstairs and they would help him fight this monster. However, our protagonist looked in their direction and smiled slightly. He took the cigarette out of his mouth and exhaled again, saying that he had tried to kill this monster, but he had failed, so all hope was on them. All those standing below were not happy to hear such words from our hero. However, despite all the preparations, he barely dodged that monster. Our hero understood that this company had no chance against this beast. It was clear to our leader that this evil creature would fully recover its health after eating all those people. So he wouldn't be able to kill it now. He would have to prepare himself better to try again. As he left, he wished them good luck and said that he hoped they could defeat the beast. Of course, they started yelling in his direction, calling him bad words and saying that he had just decided to run away and leave them all here alone with this animal. The girl shouted loudly. He seemed to have forgotten that his friend was here too. They immediately started looking for our hero's friend to give him to this horrible creature to eat. But they couldn't find him anywhere. And the next second, someone from above asked them who they were looking for so intently. It was our friend, who told them with a smile that he was just scared and decided to run upstairs. He was very lucky to escape before the stairs collapsed. Everyone downstairs was furious and started shouting that they would find him and he would get what he deserved. They thought he was quiet and harmless, but it seems he fooled them and stabbed them right in the back. The young man jokingly told the girl that she would probably not be able to do what she had planned because she was very busy at the moment. At that time, the giant monster was already drooling and anticipating the finest meal that was right in front of it. And now that they're even more scared, he's about to attack them. This huge monster was enjoying the feelings of fear that all these people were experiencing, and it was waiting for more fuel to begin its feast. In a last-ditch effort, the man in the tie shouted that if the thing regained its health, it could destroy the altar. Are they really going to leave them all here, alone? As they climbed higher and higher up the stairs, our hero told them with a smile that they need not fear that this monster will destroy the altar, for they are victims of their own free will. Now that the man was in utter hopelessness because he was unable to influence our two heroes in any way, he turned to the huge monster and began to tremble with fear, remembering the words of the little devil who had said earlier that this beast must be fed with something very tasty and must give it 5 people a day to eat. In the next second, that huge, terrifying monster opened its big mouth to eat those tasty people. At that time, our hero stood up and looked at this horrible but very righteous scene. He was truly happy to see such a noble sacrifice on their part. Nevertheless, he climbed to the very top and started walking toward the open magic door to leave this altar. At that moment, he saw his old acquaintance standing against the wall, waiting for him. He wondered why he had done it, why he had destroyed those stairs and come here. Our hero understands very well that his friend did it for a reason. He brought these people here to destroy them in the battle with this monster. However, he had to answer very carefully now because our hero was extremely serious. The young man said with a smile that he had finally realized what he could do for our hero. He wants our protagonist to make full use of him, all his skills and abilities. For a while, they stood silently looking at each other. In disbelief, our hero looked at his opponent and thought about what to say to him. After a pause, our hero asked him his question. Why does he want to be used and why? Taking another breath and using his magic item, our hero was well aware that there was a certain purpose behind it. But the young man replied that our hero was always running ahead and looking forward. He made sure of that when he fought this anti-hero and his thugs. He was much stronger than them, but he didn't kill anyone, even though he knew they would recover and take revenge. And even when the altar appeared, He was able to take control of the situation and easily subjugate people to his will. The young man doesn't know why he didn't kill people, but there must have been a reason. Isn't he right? Our hero continued to stare at him in silence, without making any reply. In response, the young man held out his hands and said that our hero could use them, and he's willing to get his hands dirty in all the filthy deeds. The only thing he wants in return is for our hero to take him with him so that he can follow along wherever he goes. Covering his eyes, our hero grinned and asked him what would happen if he failed. Clenching his fist, the young man added that this time he didn't have a chance to deal with these people before. And because of that, our hero suffered. But he won't let anyone else get that far ahead. And the next time will be different, he promises. It seems that our protagonist didn't want to listen to him anymore and turned away and walked in the other direction. Of course, the young man kept assuring him that people would eventually gather around him because he was so conspicuous. But he was ready to destroy anyone. He was ready to deal with anyone who stood in his way, so that only our hero could fully focus on his main goal. He will also become stronger around him. And the stronger he gets, the more he'll be able to help him. But he asks him to tell about our hero's purpose. After his long speech, our hero turned to him and asked what would happen in a situation where some difficulty arose and he couldn't follow him. For example, if they were separated. At this point he smiled. The young man was silent for a moment, but it was a hint from our hero. There was something special about the second training area, so not everyone could handle it. But he immediately found an answer and declared that he would definitely get stronger and find him. He suggested that they become buddies again. The protagonist smiled and turned away from him, walking to the side. The young man didn't seem to get through to him, and there was no way he could ask to be his friend. He began to catch up with him, speaking louder and louder. He asked our hero to give him another chance. He made mistakes like everyone else, but he asked him to be close. Our hero threw the cigarette on the floor, stomped it out with his foot, and said that he had misunderstood and that he should come here tomorrow at 1 o'clock on the dot. By then, our hero will be able to take care of everything and complete his mission. The young man obviously didn't know what he was talking about, so he just stood there and looked at him in silence. However, he would be able to get all the runes that were left after all those people downstairs. After all, he killed them all by bringing them here, so these gems belong to him. After saying that, our hero started to leave, adding that he would see him later. He left the young man who was still screaming, not understanding why our hero didn't take him. However, the warrior realized that he might still need the young man, so he shouldn't give up on him. A new wave of memories washed over the warrior, and he clearly remembered the words his girlfriend had spoken earlier. For if he goes back in time, even to save all of humanity, strangely enough, there will be those who stand in his way, and he is bound to find a punisher to act in his place. Such people are necessary for any ruler, not just a strong warrior like this girl. These assassination squads get their hands dirty in place of their ruler and lord, helping him achieve his goals. In one of his past lives, our hero was a punisher. He wanted to choose an assistant, but he didn't know who it would be. At this point, the young man devoured his gems and silently followed our hero with his gaze. He still can't trust this young man because he was too emotional. Anyway, when they enter the second zone, they're bound to get separated. Maybe they'll meet again and this guy will change his mind. But the prospect of getting a useful punisher in a fight with this monster for a few runes and 8 madman's candies wasn't such a bad investment. The thought brought a smile to our hero's face. Then so be it. In the meantime, he had to focus all his energy on the hidden object and finish off this monster. So he decided to rest for a while before starting again. He was very curious to know what reward he would get after fighting this monster. The requirements for obtaining the second hidden item are quite simple. We have to deal with this huge creature before it destroys the altar and breaks free. This task is almost finished. One last blow, and it's over. Tired and with several wounds, our hero sat on the ground, leaning on his rapier. At that moment, a golden magic door appeared in front of his eyes, giving him access to a new room with a reward. A new message informed him that the hidden task had been completed. He immediately entered the room and stretched out his hand for the coveted hidden object. At that moment, a smile appeared on his face, for it was the ring of the Vampire King. a special item that he was very happy to see. Thinking back to one of his former friends, he kept wondering where his friend had gotten a ring like that. And now he had it too. That's why no one else could find it. It was a very special jewel, a very rare ring, with a big, beautiful, shiny stone in the middle,